was always down in town on the Common. For like 13 years we were there. And then when this house opened up, we got kind of excited, looked at it, made an offer, the school did, and it kind of fell through. They had somebody else that had already given them what they were looking for. So it went on the back burner, and then next thing we knew, that offer had fallen through, and we said, oh, let's look again. And we did, and we are so excited to have this that we have now for the program. Endless possibilities. We have an area out back behind the house that we're looking to develop with the kids into terraced gardens. And there's all kinds of good stuff happening, so come see. It was made by one of our students 10 years ago. Oh, wow. So when we left the Common, we made sure the sign came with us.
Hello everybody. So, welcome to the house. This is the STAR program house. This is where we work. If you look around, I'm assuming you can probably guess which ones are our students here. But we're really happy and proud to have all of you here visiting today. And I'm glad to be able to share this really unique and an amazing experience with our students and with everybody else. What we've got going on this morning actually is kind of wrapping up a few projects that these guys have been working on. One of the biggest components of what we do is that we do a lot of service learning, partnering with different community folks and looking for ways to improve the school community but also the surrounding communities. So these guys are all working on various aspects of those projects. So in the back room we have a couple of guys who are editing some videos of a specific project that we do with the 8th graders every year, which is around, they read To Build a Fire by Jack London, and we actually teach primitive fire building to their 8th graders, and so they're editing a video around that service project. We've got a couple guys in this kitchen who are working on it's a layer map, and so we have an outdoor classroom area. For those of you who came, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, those connections to better understand our sense of place out there. And so that's happening. They're working on the topographic maps that those of you who were here last week saw. And then in here, Eric is actually working on our trail building project. So we've been partnering with Norwich University, and last week we built a couple of bridges out in our school forest that are replacing some older bridges, and it's part of an ongoing project to develop a 5-kilometer cross-country running course. And so he's the point person on that. He spent all of last spring semester researching. He's our local expert. So he actually is read up on Act 250. He's contacted the folks from Norwich. And so we have partners from the construction management department that are working to build the bridges. And then we're also going to be working with the civil engineering department to do some surveying to make sure that the course is adequate for high school competition.
I don't know, however many he wants.
Actually, I like our one downstairs.
Basically, we, like, every Friday or so, we go up to the woods and we literally go to a place called the Dikine, or meaning home, it's Abenaki, and where we just sit down and reflect on what we had done that day or stuff like that, and we literally drew pictures of where we all sat of our Dikine. And Luke was going around taking pictures to help with the layer map, so we layered what we drew, what he took pictures of, and now we're doing a topographic map part of it.
You'll actually find like medals and lines, like playing on the ground, like ridiculous amount of probably get to know it.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Good. On behalf of the Northfield School District and the Washington South Supervisory Union, it is my pleasure to welcome all of you here today. Students, faculty, community members, our school board of directors, and especially the Vermont Board of Education and the Vermont Teacher of the Year finalists. It is an honor to host the state board meeting and to be selected as the site for the announcement of the Teacher of the Year. Congratulations to all the finalists on your accomplishments. begins their meeting, I would like to take a moment and thank all of the staff who assisted in the preparation for today's events. Your time and effort is greatly appreciated. This could not have happened without all of you helping out. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to introduce the principal of the Northfield Middle and High School, Mr. Ryan Parkman, to say a few words.
Thank you and welcome. I'd like to echo the sentiments of Superintendent Gossens on how much of an honor it is for our school to host this event and for the 3 finalists to be here. And I'd like to mention to the students, this is not an event that every student in the state gets to witness, so you guys are pretty lucky. So I want you to show all guests here the utmost respect and show them what we call our Northfield pride. And without much further ado, I'd like to introduce the chair of the State Board of Education, Stephen Morse.
Thank you, Principal Parkman, and it's an honor to be here and to see all this enthusiasm and pride in this school. And it's certainly a major event honoring the Teacher of the Year. So I'm going to call the State Board of Education meeting to order, and we usually start our meetings with the Pledge of Allegiance, so I'd ask you to stand and join us. Now we're going to be honored to have to hear the music of the middle school chorus.
See
a wonderful way to start a State Board of Education meeting. Let's give them one more hand. I hope my fellow board members will remember that tune and they'll stand by the chairman all day. Obviously, we have many guests here today, and the distinguished guests are the students who are in attendance here today. But in addition, we have some other special guests that I'd like to recognize and ask you to simply stand and be recognized. And maybe we'll hold the applause until everyone has been introduced. We have two representatives from the Vermont House of Representatives here, Ann Donahue of Northfield, Patty Lewis, who serves on the House Education Committee from Berlin. And I also want to introduce, we have a special guest today, the incoming Secretary of Education, Rebecca Holcomb. And some folks that you may know locally, Justin Wrigley, who is the Northfield School Board Chair. Daniel Lane, the Northfield School Board Clerk. Sophia Bennett from the Northfield School Board. Emily Gray from the Northfield School Board. And Chief James Jobeck from the Northfield Police Fire Department. And Chief Peter Demency Jr. from the Northfield Fire Department. I apologize. I'm mixing up the fire department and the police departments here. And Robert Lewis, the town manager. Now my pleasure to introduce the Secretary of Education, Armando Velaseca.
Good morning, you guys. It's great to be here. I was here last spring and had a wonderful visit, spent the day. I actually got in trouble because I didn't want to leave and I got back late for a meeting. But those of you who know me that know that's probably not unusual. I really enjoy being here. I think one of the reasons the board, we're all here and all of you is to honor an outstanding educator. But all of our educators do an unbelievable job of working to prepare you for a better life and to graduate from high school ready to continue your education in some capacity. But mostly, I personally like being in schools, I like being around students, I like being in classes. So to me, not only is it a thrill to recognize some outstanding teachers, but also to be here with you. The Vermont Teacher of the Year goes back since 1964. Every year, we recognize an outstanding educator that really is a symbol for all of the other educators that we have in the state. It's impossible to identify 15,000 teachers as outstanding, so we always try, with the work of the former teachers, to find a person who is, has the qualities and the traits that we appreciate in teachers, that we value, but quite often these are just a symbol for so many other wonderful teachers. There are many wonderful teachers here at Northfield Middle High School, at the elementary school, and this is one of those opportunities we have to honor all of you by naming one. The nice thing about this is that the winner gets to go to Washington and represent Vermont as a finalist for the National Teacher of the Year. And one of the coolest things, I think, is that he or she gets to meet the President of the United States. So they will meet President Obama and have a picture taken with him, and he will also share his thoughts about the wonderful work that teachers do to educate our young people. I have here some special guests, and I am going to do a better job than our chair about let's wait till the end to applaud, okay? And I'll repeat it several times just to make sure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the former Teachers of the Year, who will then come up here, and then we'll applaud. And these former Teachers of the Year were very helpful. Yes, you're coming up. Surprise! These former Teachers of the Year did help the selection process, and we value the efforts that they do and also the work that they have done to be models for others. So I will start with and there's not in any particular order, but I will name the person who was the outgoing Teacher of the Year, who was a person that probably wouldn't be here today if I know Jay, I'm going to embarrass you, if I hadn't hired him as a teacher many years ago when I was a high school principal. Fortunately, he stayed in education because the job that he had was not quite full-time. I can't really remember the details, but he stayed in education and is now one of the winners. So, and I can't say something about all the candidates. You know, Janet, I can say something about you. But, so I'm going to introduce folks and then we can applaud at the end, okay? So Jay Hoffman, the 2013 Vermont Teacher of the Year. Karen Heath, the 2005 Teacher of the Year. Jay, you decide where you're Teachers of the Year. You can figure out where it's at. Janet Stewart, who a wonderful person who I've known for many years, who was the 2002 Teacher of the Year. Katie Sullivan, the 1997 Teacher of the Year. Katie's not here. Okay. All right. Carol Smith, the 1995 Teacher of the Year. Tom Sable, the 2009 Teacher of the Year, who was the winner of the Milken Award. I get that, Tom. Which is a different Teacher of the Year award, but I'm going to ask Tom to come up and join the others. And then we have Peter Evans, who was the principal of Montpelier High School, is a Northfield resident, and is in charge of YATS, an Up for Learning organization. Now we're getting all that. They all say thank you. I'm sure thank you is not what they really think. So now what we're going to do is I'm just going to have there are 3 finalists for the Teacher of the Year. Just to give you a little background, explaining. There are Teachers of the Year are nominated by by schools or by principals or by kids or by teachers, other teachers. From those nominations, it's brought down to about 5. Those 5 or 6 then interview with the State Board of Education, interview with other members of former Teachers of the Year and folks from our agency, and then from that we determined to have 3 finalists. Those 3 finalists then have site visits where folks go to the schools and visit, and it's probably a little stressful for them, but also it's a great honor for them as well. And what I will do today is name the finalists who will just come up and say a couple of words, and then the secretary, the chair of the board will name the winner. So I will start with our first finalist is Valerie Gasco, who is a special educator at Riverside Middle School in Springfield, Vermont.
First of all, I want to congratulate Luke and Katie and to say thank you to the Teacher of the Year Committee and the board for all the hard work and support and encouragement during the selection process. This whole process started with a nomination for my principal, Becky Reed, last spring. It was an unexpected honor and has afforded me an opportunity to deeply reflect about my choice to become a teacher, as well as about the complex role that public education plays in our society. I drew on some of my own childhood experiences that were both stressful and challenging, remembering the compassionate teachers who held me accountable while they helped me to believe in my strength to succeed. Obviously, I learned to read and write and to solve math problems. I explored a wide array of social studies and science topics. I took my fair share of standardized tests with mixed results sometimes. While those aspects of my education were essential for me, they are not what made me want to become a teacher, and I don't believe they're what make me a good teacher. I learned from my parents and teachers that there's power in knowing that someone believes in you and your strength to persevere and succeed despite your challenges. It's my job to teach my students, and it's their job to do the work they need to do to improve their skills and their understanding. But not every student is starting the race from the same point. And everyone won't reach the finish line at the same time, or in the same way, or even reach the same finish line. What amazes me every day is the resilience that some students bring to that challenge. The world in which our young people are growing up is dramatically changing, and some of the kids that we deal with every day must cope with stressors that would make most of us buckle. Yet when I stand in the hall in the morning to greet them with a smile, they smile back. When I ask them to focus their energies on this math problem or that nonfiction article or writing this paragraph, they give back. These kids come to school every day believing, hoping that education is going to make a difference in their lives. And I come to school every day grateful to be able to take part in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. Our next alternate is a 6th grade teacher from Rumney Memorial School in Middlesex, and that is Katie Farber. Katie?
Thank you so much, Secretary Balaseca. It is truly an honor to be here with this group of innovative teachers and supporters of public education and all the students here from the Northfield community. I thank the Vermont Agency of Education and the Board of Ed and the Teacher of the Year Committee for providing a way to celebrate Vermont's teachers, but really to also bring teacher voice and leadership to a wider platform. If we are truly to make schools better, it must be from the inside out, using teachers to shape, lead, and innovate school policy and decision making. There are thousands of teachers across the great state of Vermont who are making a difference, as we've just heard, in the lives of so many children. We must ask for their input. Give them the tools to lead and create better schools. Help them get the resources they need to teach and to be heard. And support them once they're in the classroom with mentoring programs, a collaborative and supportive learning environment, and professional compensation. Our society is changing rapidly, and our schools should be as well. Teachers need the tools to create innovative, personal, and individualized learning grounded in local communities. We need to provide authentic learning opportunities through leadership and service learning to engage our students. Our students in schools sometimes are judged on the scores of one test in one day in 1 hour, but I think that multiple and varied ways of judging students or assessing them is more appropriate to think about the whole child and having humanity in education. Information is free and accessible, and instead of being the sole instruments of information, teachers are facilitators in growing flexible, creative, critical thinkers who can solve the complex problems that our world is facing. Our students need experience with this. Service learning and school-wide leadership experiences can transform school climates, promote learning between grade levels and ages, increase engagement, motivation, feelings of community, and engage students in higher level learning. This way, our communities can see our schools and our students differently, as partners, as allies, as instruments of hope, and who can solve complex problems, and I think that is really what our world needs right now. Thank you so much.
So now the reason we're all here, and I think I know that the Northfield community, the middle high school, the entire school system, the elementary school, are all proud to know that one of their own is the Vermont 2014 Teacher of the Year. Without any further delay, I'd like to introduce Luke Foley.
Wow. Thank you all so much. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Villaseca and the State Board of Education for being here today and for your commitment to ensuring only the best for all of Vermont students. What you do on a day-to-day basis is really impressive, and thank you. I'd also like to thank the previous teachers of the year, principals of the year, who've made this process slightly less anxiety-provoking. You were also generous and supportive and caring with your time, and it made all of us feel really welcomed, and it allowed us to really perform to the best of our abilities. I'd also like to thank Ms. Angela Ross, who coordinated she has also provided a ton of guidance and support, and thank you very much for that. I feel honored and humbled to be accepting this honor here today. I'm honored to join such a remarkable and distinguished group of educators who represent the best the state of Vermont has to offer. I'm humbled because there are simply so many outstanding, passionate, creative educators out there who challenge, inspire, and support their students every day. Both Ms. Farber and Ms. Gasco are fine examples of incredible educators who have made a world of difference within their communities and who continue to inspire and educate their children, as well as other educators like myself. So thank you. And while I'm the one who's up here receiving this honor, there are so many dedicated faculty, staff, and administration who deserve our recognition and acknowledgement for the countless hours and boundless energy they invest in you, their students. Take a look around at your teachers, at your principal, at your assistant principal, at your superintendent, the members of our school board, and at all of the staff of this school. I know that I couldn't do what I do on a day-to-day basis without their support, and I'm guessing the same is true for you as well. So thank you to all of the faculty and staff here at Northfield. I'd also like to take a moment to thank all of our community partners who are willing to take a leap of faith in partnering their programs, their departments, their farms, their equipment, and themselves with all of our students. Without you, many of the dynamic and engaging learning opportunities that our students experience would not be possible. So thank you. I promise that I'm not going to just keep thanking people all day long. It's hard not to be gracious in this moment. I also want to take the time to thank all of you, the students, for without your openness, your enthusiasm, and your desire, all of these ideas and dreams would be for naught. You make this happen. You're willing to try something new, something different, and you make it work. Whether it be hiking into remote huts in the White Mountains, lifting, carrying, and flipping huge logs until you can't lift your arms above your head and liking it, or running quarter-mile repeats until you want to collapse. Your willingness to test your limits and to trust me, I can't tell you how much it means. You're all the driving force behind our work. You're the reason why we show up each day, excited to help you realize your dreams. I appreciate that you're willing to let me be a part of that journey. So thank you to the students. I'm especially excited to celebrate this honor with the students from the STAR program and my colleague and friend Judy Knapp. On a day-to-day basis, you challenge, inspire, provoke, and motivate me. I probably learn far more from you than you could ever imagine. And that is powerful, you see. When we realize that education is a two-way street, that we're all learning and growing together, we have a strong community, one that pushes and pulls, one that supports and challenges each person through their own struggles. And every member, regardless of what their challenges might be, feels a sense of acceptance and belonging. I hope you know how proud I am of you and how much it means to me that you've been willing to give this alternative thing a shot. A few years ago when I joined the STAR program, I had a goal of proving that there was a better way to educate, but that it would take some outside-of-the-box thinking and a commitment to challenging students to think about their education in more than just academic terms. I also wanted to prove that this style of education doesn't just work for some students, it works for all students. I think that today is a testament to this belief of mine. Furthermore, when I look at each of you, I see that you also believe it. I see it in your eyes. I see it in the way that you carry yourselves. I see it in the way that you represent our school and our community. So thank you for allowing me to be your teacher. In thinking back and reflecting upon how I've come to find myself on this stage, it's impossible for me to fully acknowledge all of those who have influenced, inspired, prepared, and supported me along the way. I'd like to thank my parents, who happen to be in the crowd today and who both were educators for 30 years in Colorado, where I grew up. From my father, I learned a strong work ethic and the definition of integrity. Not because he flouted his, but because I've never met anybody who so consistently does the right thing. From my mom, I've taken the concepts of unconditional support for my students and a steadfast commitment to making my community a better place, one home-cooked meal at a time. Though you might want to think twice about tasting anything that I whip up in the kitchen. I also want to thank my wife, Rachel, for putting up with me and being so supportive of my every endeavor. Even when it means storing tractor tires in our yard under the pretense that I someday might finally be able to convince some of my students to flip them over and over and over again for fun. And so thanks to the boys soccer team for helping me out with that and proving me right. Rach, you believe in me and my outlandish ideas. You choose to see my dreams and my potential, and you could just as easily focus on the early mornings, the late nights, or the fact that I sometimes come home smelling like campfire, cow manure, sweat, or some terrible combination of all those things. Beyond my family, there are countless mentors, teachers, coaches, and guides who helped me get here today. If you could all just take a moment to think, the adults in the building, who was it that inspired you to be in the position that you're in today? And if you're a student, what person is helping you to see potential in yourself that maybe you didn't see before? You see, that's the power of the teacher. We inspire, we provoke, we are the eternal optimists, except for Friday afternoon sometimes, but by Monday morning we're ready to save the world again. And frankly, we love our jobs. Why would anyone else, it's my daughter, why would anyone else electively spend most of their best years with teenagers? If you read the news, you know that you are all self-absorbed video game addicts who would rather read Snooki's tweets than engage your parents in a conversation around the dining room table. And while some of this is likely true, there's a good reason for it. There are a lot of powerful people and messages that are telling you that this is what you're supposed to be like. As a culture, we don't really do much to prepare you for the next step in your life. Yes, we want you to be successful, but we never really give you an opportunity to think about what success really means to you. And since you are young and still care about what we, your parents, your teachers, mentors think, and don't worry, I won't tell anybody that you still care about what we think. You go forth into the world and you try to make us all proud. You're left with the idea that the best that we could all expect from you would be cribs-worthy mansions, nice cars, and high-powered jobs. You deserve more. You deserve to have the opportunity to set your own course, to fall, dust yourself, and get moving again towards whatever it is that you are working towards. As a culture, not only do we not give you chances to define your own sense of success, we also don't let you fail. You deserve to fall down. I promise you, you'll learn more from those moments when the cards are stacked against you than when all the things in the world are going right. I want you to have a chance to struggle, to flounder, and then to overcome. Because life isn't easy, and by the looks of things, it's not going to get any easier. But we don't have to be victims to this and all the bad news out there. We can do something about it. I want you to have the opportunity to create your own definition of success. Now, I don't believe in giving out answers. Typically, you've got to find those for yourself. But here's a little gem for you to sit with, something of a seed that might eventually grow into some self-awareness for each of you. Success is waking up excited for your day and going to bed feeling fulfilled. Now, I had to wait until I was 24 to hear those words, and by then, I'd been struggling to really define what my path or my purpose in life was. I remember hearing that quote, and it gave me a chance to reevaluate. to hit the pause button and think about what the goals were that I was really working towards, about who and what I wanted to be. Then I lost a bet, and that's why I'm here with you today. Just kidding. More laughs there. Come on, guys. It's funny. I promise, I didn't make the choice to become a teacher. In fact, I might even go so far as to say that I always knew that I'd be an educator. All those other hopes and dreams were really delaying the inevitable. So do me a favor. Think about that one line for a little while. About success. About defining it in your own terms and then following it, whatever that means it might take. Think about what you love doing. Think about what you're good at. Think about where your great passion meets the world's great need. And then go do that with all of your might. And I'll be with you every step of the way. Thank you.
Bear with.
Congratulations, all. The word was currently got out about who the selection was, and so I have a letter from the governor that's addressed to Luke. Congratulations on your selection as Vermont Teacher of the Year. This is a tremendous honor for you and for Northfield Middle High School. Awarded by the Vermont Agency of Education, the Vermont Teacher of the Year is given annually to the teaching professional who implements the best practices within the classroom. Your selection as the 2014 Vermont Teacher of the Year recognizes your outstanding work as a grades 9 through 12 STAR program teacher at Northfield Middle High School. I recognize the importance of teachers like you can have on students. In fact, a dedicated and innovative teacher made a tremendous difference in my life. I'll let it go, but we all know who he's talking about, that story that he tells all too often. Your work as an alternative learning teacher and development of an innovative curriculum has resulted in a creative and inspiring learning environment. I commend you on your hard work. Again, my sincere congratulations on your selection of the Vermont Teacher of the Year. Your commitment makes a difference to your students and Vermont's future. Sincerely, Governor Peter Shumlin.
So, in closing, I'd like to thank Ryan Parkman and Laura Gossens, the superintendent and principal, for putting this together. You all come in from your classes and you think it's all pretty easy. There's all kinds of work that goes on before this occurs in order for it to go smoothly. So I want to thank you all for what you've done. Thank you all here. You've been great, wonderful audience, and hopefully you've been inspired by some of the things you heard from our teachers. And with that, I will let Principal Parkman finish up because he's got to give you some directions. Thank you very much.
Education. I'm having to do it quietly because my gavel has been taken away from me. Apparently I abused it the last time.
There's a drum kit.
I first want to thank the folks at Northfield Middle High School for your hospitality today. It's I'm not sure there's anyone in the room, but it's really appreciated. You've really outdone yourselves. This is so far one of our better meeting locations.
and we really appreciate our bag of welcome gifts. There's some talk that there might be a board group sock photo at the end of the meeting.
Really?
I don't know what other clothes we'll be wearing at the time, so if you care to see, you can hang around for the whole meeting.
We could do a sock calendar.
Yes. And I also, before we get started, want to acknowledge Angela for all the work that you did on this Teacher of the Year. It was really done very, very well, and really appreciate all your hard work, and I think the finalists did as well. Before we go around the table and introduce ourselves, I want to remind people that there's a sign-up sheet on the back table. If you have not signed up, please sign in. How am I doing, Carol? Okay. Usually Carol has to give me a couple of messages. So let's go around the table and introduce the board members. I'm Stephen Morris from Newfane, the chair of the State Board of Education.
Armando Villasecca, I'm the secretary from Westford.
Morgan McIver from Plainfield.
Margaret McLean from Peachum. Stacy Weinberger from Burlington.
Bill Mathis, Goshen.
Mark Parent from Middlebury.
Krista Hewling, Jeffersonville.
Lachlan Francis, Putney.
Bonnie Johnson Ayton, Montpelier.
Sean Marie Oler, Bennington.
Okay. Thank you. Our next item is item C. We look forward to hearing from the Secretary Designee, Rebecca Holcomb. Rebecca, would you come up to the table, please? Congratulations on your appointment, and welcome. And we look forward to working with you and furthering Vermont's educational system. And we appreciate you and your busy schedule coming here today for a few moments. So.
I'm going to be brief, but I wanted to first just take this opportunity to thank you all for the tremendous honor and privilege it is to be able to sit in this seat and look forward to helping the children of Vermont. One of the first things you learn as a teacher is that teaching is a sacred trust. Parents send the thing that they value and love the most in the world to you. And with that comes tremendous responsibility and tremendous trust, and you have to honor that. And one of the things that's so compelling about this position to me is that we have to get it right for the kids. We have to do the best that we can. And when I'm sitting and working and talking with children in the STAR program, I realize that for them, when teachers take the time to figure out how they learn and how to make it possible for them to realize their goals, we can change the outcomes of those children. In my own family, my own experience, my grandmother came to this country as a non-English speaker and learned English in public schools. She ended up dropping out of high school because she was a foster child. I could be there right now, but because someone helped her, she was able to end up getting a solid enough education to be able to support herself independently. Because when her husband died, someone reached out and saw potential in my own mother. My mother was able to go to a good school and ultimately able to go to college on a full scholarship. Her brother was sent to an orphanage, and that's luck. What's really important is that the lives of our children and the power of them to be able to author their own lives not be a chance of luck. We have a responsibility to make sure every child has that opportunity. And that's why I'm here today, and that's why I'm so excited and to have this honor and this privilege to work with you to make that happen. I want to thank Armando and the rest of the staff at the Agency of Education. I've been pestering them, calling them, and emailing at late hours, and they've been very, very generous with their time. And I'm very mindful that as I begin this work and look forward to starting in January, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. I'm standing on the tremendous foundation that's been laid by people in the AOE, by people at the State Board who've done tremendous work to develop new education quality standards that are really going to change the game for kids as we move forward. There's a saying that you can weigh a pig 10 times, and at the end of the day, you'll know how much the pig weighs. But you don't really have much insight in how to make that pig fatter. And I think the same goes for schools. You can test kids every year. You can test them. And you may have good insight on where they are in terms of the rankings, but we aren't really learning how to help kids learn better and how to help teachers build the capacity to be better. And I think Vermonters are ready for change. I think Vermonters are ready to really focus on learning and on focus on teaching and how to develop the capacity in-house to make good things happen for kids. And it's a privilege. We lived in Massachusetts for years, and we spent 10 years trying to figure out how to come back and put our kids back in Vermont schools. And I really have tremendous faith, and I think seeing the speakers today, we have everything it takes right here. We just need to find a way to leverage it and share it and make those pockets of brilliance and excellence become statewide. We already have tremendous work that's been done to lay the foundation, and my job will be one in a series of people. I'm stepping on Armando's shoulders to take it the next step, and we'll do that hopefully together. As I talk to the agency, there have been 3 goals that are coming out. You'll recognize them, because what's so wonderful about this moment is that we all sort of share the same purpose. I'm hearing conversations about closing the opportunity gaps. And I'm saying opportunity gaps, not achievement gaps, because it's the opportunities to learn that make the difference in the long run between whether children have what it takes to author their own lives. And I'm also hearing discussion about how we do better what we already do. How do we improve the quality of the experience for our students so that they're able to live meaningful lives and participate in their communities. It's not that our teachers aren't doing good jobs. They're doing terrific jobs. But the world has changed. And what students need to be able to do now is very different from what they needed to be able to do 10 years ago. I was speaking with a student who wanted to be a farmer, and he was talking about how he was looking forward to taking care of the cows. And as he's speaking, I'm thinking about a story I heard about a pilot demonstration farm where the farmer sat behind a computer screen monitoring the feed that was being administered to the cows. The world has changed. If our kids aren't educated to do the things computers can't do, they aren't employable. They won't be able to provide for their families and participate in their communities. So the things that we've done, it's not that they were wrong for when we did them, but we need to do different things. And I think that's what the speakers today were speaking about so eloquently. And then the final goal that I keep hearing is to look at the effectiveness of what we do. We have in the state innovative educators who are really trying and experimenting with new strategies. Many of the things that are coming out, the personal learning plans, the flexible pathways, these sound new, but there are people who've been doing these for years because that's what good teaching is. And part of our challenge is to pull those out and maybe measure their effectiveness in a way so that we can use research both on what good practice is, but also on the effectiveness of the specific programs that we're already piloting in the state to share good ideas so that they can be implemented in other sites as well. In closing, I'd like to share just 2 quotes. Because to me, they really speak about what this work is for educators. When I first entered this profession as a novice teacher, and that was a tough year, I asked an experienced principal, what made her tick? How do you do this? How do you, when it's so hard, how do you keep going? And she said, I look into the eyes of every child, and I imagine it's my own child. And then I try to teach them the way I would want someone to treat and teach my child. And then I want to share a quote of a principal I recently interviewed in a Los Angeles public school. It's a 100% low-income, 100% Latino school. And I asked her what motivated her. And she said, I look into the eyes of every child, and I see the cure for cancer. And we can't afford to throw these children away. And that's our work. We have to look in every child's eyes and see the cure for cancer or see the solution to the problems that we have in front of us. And I'm so glad that Morgan and Lachlan are here because I think they remind us in a really powerful way both of why we're here and why this is so important, this work, but also I think that because of where they sit, they have a unique power to help us understand where the path is that we need to take to get out of where we are and towards something that's a bright future for all of our kids. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, move on to item D, our priority work session. Before we get into the discussion that we had identified for today, we need to formally approve the priorities that Margaret has been so faithfully drafting for us. And then I also would like, maybe it doesn't need a formal vote, but at least the board's acknowledgement that you approve of the priority process that I outlined in a memo dated September 26th. And Carol's also provided a schedule of when we discuss the priorities. Now, I would say to you that in terms of the process, we'll refine this as time goes on. And if the priorities, if there's a more timely calendar, we can set that as we go. But I guess I'd start there. Are you all comfortable with the process and with the calendar at this point? All right, and give you an opportunity to speak up if not. That's what we're gonna function on, if no one objects. Not hearing any objection, that's,
You want a motion?
I don't think we need a formal motion, just, the minutes will reflect that the board, no, on this we do. So that will take us back to the priorities that we've outlined, starting back at our retreat in June, I guess, and we've refined in the last few months at various meetings. Is there a motion?
Motion?
Second.
Motion by Sean Marie to approve the 7 priorities as we've outlined them. It's been seconded by Mark. Discussion. Not hearing any. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. Not hearing any noes. The priorities have been established by a unanimous vote.
I will note that it says the cost implications say non-applicable.
Or not available.
So they're on there?
Because
At the very end, it says cost implications, but obviously, as we work our way through these, there will be cost implications, and that'll be part of our policy procedure of trying to determine how that affects the policy. Thank you for pointing that out. All right, with that, we will move on to our discussion of priority number 2, state and local assessment systems. And in line with what we just agreed to, Carol has put together a panel, I believe, to give us some thoughts. My thinking going into this particular discussion, it'll be very shocking if we can actually conclude something today, but that this is an initial step of how we begin to look at this priority, and it will lead to subsequent discussions. So with that, could I ask the panel to assemble at the front table? Please introduce yourselves, and I presume the 5 of you have come together and figured out what the sequence of presentations are.
That may be presumptuous.
One of those rare moments where I'm not telling you what to do.
Do you understand?
I'm Caroline Camara. I'm from Mount Abraham Union High School in Bristol, Vermont. I'm the director of the Pathways program, which is a full-time personalized learning program at Mount Abe, and I'm also co-teacher leader of the personalized learning department.
I'm Diane Marcoula-Claire, and I am a kindergarten teacher at Hyde Park Elementary School.
I'm Lindy Johnson, and I'm the literacy coordinator for K-2 at the Berry Supervisory Union.
John Fisher with the Agency of Education.
Michael Hawk with the Agency of Education.
How would you like to proceed? We have some questions. We could start with the questions that were presented to us.
Why don't you respond to those, and we should be mindful that we're going to try to keep this discussion to about an hour today. There certainly will be some questions or some comments from board members, so please save us some time at the end for that. If board members could keep their questions until the end, I think that might be helpful today. Okay?
I think the first question was, how has assessment changed us as teachers, right?
Mm-hmm.
I started off my career as a science teacher in the high school, teaching everything from earth science to physics and chemistry and biology, and then was asked to move into the personalized learning world, and it has profoundly changed me as a teacher and educator. I'll never teach the way that I thought I was going to when I first started out. Our students are learners, and if I can borrow from a quote that I've recently seen, students are waiting for teachers to direct them, and learners are self-directed. And I feel that that's a very significant piece of information for us to take to heart as we move forward in the 21st century and creating our new citizens, is that we are creating lifelong learners, and we need to give them the skills that lifelong learners need. It's not all about content anymore. And so when we are assessing students, we need to be looking at their skill development. We need to be looking at how are they problem solving, how are they thinking critically, how are they collaborating and developing themselves personally. What type of global citizen do they see themselves becoming? And assessment for me has become all about formative assessment leading towards the summative. And it's about giving students opportunities to practice those skills over and over again, which includes reading and writing and doing math and learning chemistry and understanding the world around them and through various lenses. But at the same time, they need to bring that to a higher level of understanding for themselves so that they can become those lifelong learners with the skill sets that they need. So for me, I changed from being a summative assessment teacher of we're working towards the next quiz or project or test or lab report to what are you doing now and how can I give you feedback so that you can make it better, so that you can prepare for the performance assessment at the end of the day or at the end of the semester. And that's really how personalized learning has changed me as an educator in terms of how I assess and how I look at my students. It's an everyday, ongoing process.
I actually wrote my response, and I believe you have a copy. So I'm not sure if you want me to read it, or so everyone
Why
can
don't
hear
you,
it,
I'll pass that out, but I don't want the board members to get bogged down reading something.
Right, and I don't want to bog you down either, so.
Well, why don't you just hit the high points of what you've presented to us, if you would, please?
Okay.
Instead of reading the whole thing.
Okay. Well, I've been teaching at Hyde Park Elementary School for 41 years now. And when I started teaching years ago, things were a lot simpler. In kindergarten, children got to be kids. They got to talk to each other and learn social skills and ask questions and ponder about things. My students and I, we would go out in the community and get to know the people. We tapped maple trees right outside of our door, and we made maple syrup right in our classroom. And we planted a huge sunflower garden right in front of the whole school, and we dug in the dirt, and we kept journals about everything. And we studied monarch butterflies and learned about metamorphosis, and we studied the frogs and the tadpoles and all of that. And we would go out there, and we didn't have money for field trips. So we'd go out in our community and we would get to know the people in it. And people, we would invite them in and they would tell us what they did for work. And they were so inspirational that many of my students became what they talked about because they were so inspired, even at age 5. Grandparents were always welcome in our classroom. They had an open invitation, and boy, did we get a lot of them because we learned the most from them. We learned the most from the grandparents. We learned things like letters and writing letters and reading and all that stuff. We learned it. And we didn't have all of the assessments that we do now. It was very simple. We had I for introduction, and we had S for satisfactory, and we never saw M for mastery at 5. Assessments, I believe, are getting out of control. When I have to put a 5-year-old, and I get very emotional about this, and I apologize, but when I have to put a 5-year-old child in front of me and set a timer and put that in front of me and say, here you go, tell me all you know, you have 1 minute. Well, I have seen so many responses to this, and this is what we do at our school. It's standardized testing. It's time, there's a time limit, and they have to tell me what they know in 1 minute. And there are 8 measures, and they get 1 minute for each. And the beauty, though, of 5-year-olds is that it doesn't matter. I started in '72, and now it's a lot later. They don't change. 5-year-olds don't change. They're literal. They will tell you the truth. They will look at you in the face and tell you exactly what they want to tell you. When you give an assessment to a 5-year-old and you have a timer, the first thing they want to know is all about the timer. So even though we've done a whole introduction and a whole practice about timers, you put that in front of them, and so I push the button and I start sweating. You got 1 minute, please, just know your letters. So, but they'll say, that's a neat timer. Did you say that's a 3? We learned 3. Do you remember we learned 3 the other day? You'll either get that, or when you ask them to count to 100, which is one of the measures, they'll go, oh, I can do that. 1 and 2, and so they count like I teach them, and so all those seconds are going by because they're timing. So my point is that it's very inappropriate, and as you take on this enormous task of statewide assessment, please remember 5-year-olds are 5-year-olds. And as you read in my letter, I do not believe that 5-year-olds should ever have to perform in front of a timer. At kindergarten age, I actually have it in my purse here. I have a stack this big, and this is what we do with every child in kindergarten 3 times a year. We have to take professional days to just administer these tests because there are so many. So I guess my point in all this is just to remember they're 5 years old, and you can learn a lot more by just teachers going around with a notebook and taking anecdotal notes on what they're doing, and ask them what they're doing, and look at the confusions that you're seeing, and have them explain stuff to you, and then that's how you will know how they're doing. And at the very end of kindergarten, then give them a test so that the first grade teachers know where they're coming from, where they need to begin with.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, has it changed over my teaching practice? When I started, I was a Title I coordinator for 8 schools in Vermont, and it was all about pre and post test. So the tests have been there. And the Title I or Chapter 1, whatever it was called then, their basis was, did we make any progress from the pre and post? But we didn't have those clear standards or great expectations that we now have that break things down to, well, what exactly does it mean at this point in kindergarten or 4th grade or whatever? Where should they be starting and where should they be going? So I see the assessment a little more understandable as a teacher if I have, now they're the Common Core for state standards, but in 2004 when we brought the grade expectations, they made our framework of standards much more concise. And I've taught in other states where you were just given the textbooks and they had the scope and sequence, which also gave you the markers of where you were going. So if I knew where that road was going, it helped me a little bit with my teaching and figuring out how to get those kids there. The other thing I think that student assessment has changed is it is more for everybody than it used to be. I think as a Title I coordinator, we were only targeting those children that were considered below average or sometimes free and reduced lunch, and we weren't thinking about everybody. I also think it can help guide us with our highest students. I often say our middle students are the most neglected because the highest ones quite often have the outside forces coming in and saying, you need to do this for my student. The lowest ones we have supports. And the middle ones, quite often, are happy to learn whatever you're putting in front of them and go along, but we're not necessarily challenging them. So I think the student assessment changing my teaching practice has been having some more targets or understanding of where, depending on what grade I'm teaching or what grade I'm working with, where are they and where should they go? But I agree that if we put too many in there, we're missing our opportunities. I also think I came into teaching perhaps with that feeling that we just filled up their head. They came in and we told them what they needed instead of becoming learners. It was to the teacher, and I think our changing times have shown that they've got the information now. They've got their digital devices. If you say something in class and it's not right, a child can look it up, and I love for them to challenge me. And this happened several years ago when I was teaching back home in Florida for a little while, and I was teaching the planets from the textbook. Well, something I said evidently wasn't right, and I was teaching on the East Coast near Cape Canaveral, so they were all rocket scientist parents. And a child came in the next day and said, Mrs. Johnson, you said this, but, and I said, come on up to the class and let's teach this, because that's what I had learned, and it's changed, and I gave you incorrect information. We used it as a teaching moment. We were able to pull something up, project it, and I think that as a teacher has changed, that I am not the be-all and end-all and know-all. And having teenage children has taught me that as well. But we have all these resources. So we also have to be updating our thoughts, and if an assessment doesn't seem to be meeting what we need for 21st century, we need to advocate for change and make sure we're not just doing a multiple choice test because that's what we were told we have to do, or using that information. We have to use that formative assessment in our classrooms and with our students, and have our students challenge us.
Thank you. John?
Would you like them to continue with their set of questions, because ours are more at a state level?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, one that was presented to you, I was particularly interested in, not that, let's cover as much as we can, but if you could create an optimal assessment system from your point of view, what would that look like?
That's a loaded question.
Hardest one on here.
It is the hardest one. What I'm experiencing now as an educator is, as you just said, is we're not the end-all and be-all, the sage on the stage anymore. We need to be learning alongside of our students and modeling how learning happens. And our learners are needing to have experiences that are relevant and important to their lives. As was just said, the information is there. We need to teach them how to access it correctly. So when we're developing a comprehensive assessment system that goes from the student to the teacher to the school to the district, the state, the federal level, we need to be looking at a variety of assessments that students are exposed to, as well as the teachers and the district and the state. We cannot depend on one type of test anymore, because brain science and educational science will tell you that you're only reaching 25% of the students that way. You're only getting to see 25% of their thinking when you're giving them a standardized multiple choice or even, writing essay test. You're only demonstrating a percentage of what they know and what they can do. So we need to provide multiple opportunities, multiple pathways for them to be able to show what they know. There's lots of ways to do that. And what we do in our program is we have students keep a portfolio. It's a working portfolio, and I know there's a lot of context for portfolios these days that are preconceived understanding of what they are. But we've developed one that works for us in our setting, where students are creating and posting their evidence. It's getting consistent feedback on a regular basis. They're able to revise and change and adapt their work so that it shows the different types of skills that they're learning. And for us, that's about 30 different skills that they have to create evidence for over the course of a semester. And so knowing the student, putting the student first, allowing them to develop their own personalized learning plan, identifying what's important to them, and where it is they feel their assets are and where their weaknesses are, what their challenges are, what they care about, is really at the center of assessment. So when you go to assess their learning of those skills, you're able to go back to all of those parts and pieces of the whole person and say, this was really important to you, but you ended up over here. Tell me about that journey from this place to this place. And in that, you can see the demonstration of all the different skills that they've been practicing and learning. And they have evidence for it. Even if it was a failure, even if they got to the end and said, this is not what I expected, or this is not what I want to do, or this is not getting me ready for what I want to do, they can still evidence all of their learning. And they've brought forward an understanding. They've had a chance to metacognate on these different aspects of their learning, and they can show you. So a balanced system really needs to involve some diagnostic testing, yes. If skills are deficient, we need to be able to identify that so that we can give them the resources and the supports that they need to be able to build those. They also need to be able to show their understanding in different ways, whether it's through a portfolio, a personalized learning plan, a transcript, a work log, something that they've built with their own hands, a relationship that they've built with another person in their community. That all comes out in a final demonstration, the big show, the exhibition at the end of their semester, where they can demonstrate all their evidence. So for me, it's really important that we have multiple ways of showing student understanding and learning, and that students have the opportunity to discuss that, to talk about it, to get feedback on it, and even revise it before they're given their final grade or their final proficiency status, before they can move on to something. So it's really giving students choice, allowing learners to learn, and then demonstrate that learning in the end in multiple ways.
And I found in kindergarten that diagnostic tests are very important because there are times you need those. But I found that formative assessments are the best at that level because they inform instruction. And if I see there's something amiss, I can reteach and all that. But also, again, the anecdotal journals, for me, are incredible. One of the biggest successes in my classroom is the message board at morning meeting. When I write it, I often write it incorrectly, or I'll start words and leave the blank spaces where there should be more letters because I know they know the sounds. So when they come and they see good morning is a blank with O and no D, and morning there's no M, because I know the sounds that I've introduced. And they come in and we're gathered around the rug and I say, didn't get enough sleep last night, I'm missing stuff, and they know, they come right in and they know right off what they're going to be doing. And they come right up and I'll say, well, can somebody help me out here? And when I see children writing the sounds that are missing in the words, that's a really good assessment for me. And I have my journal ready, or I remember and I write it down. The children that come up and don't have any idea on certain sounds, that tells me something too. It's not rocket science. I just look at what they're doing and I know how to fix it. It's the same with math. I have math, my children are 5, and they have math journals, and we do a lot of work in those journals. If I say, no, this is the number, they'll make 5 circles, and I'll know that they know what 5 is in one-to-one correspondence. I do that all the time, and those are the ones that are best. As far as the social aspects of kindergartners, when they write something, and at this stage it's still a picture, and they maybe label one letter for their word, I have just a block of wood that they come and stand up on, and I give them a microphone that's got the wire cut off, and they stand up there and they just read what they've done, and they tell about it. And there are kids that they're not ready, but there are kids who come up and they just do this whole thing about their writing to the class. That tells me a lot about them, just that. I think, I don't know if you guys remember, you folks remember, but there used to be writing portfolios. which I thought were a great thing, but we don't really do those anymore. But the thing with kindergarten is you can do something as simple as have them draw a tree and themselves beside it at the beginning of the year, do another one at mid-year, and then you see a process. And it's the same with writing. You know, we do writing prompts. In fact, I just did a writing prompt with my children on Friday, and it was something special to me. And I read them a book about something special to me, and then they had to draw a picture. And I was noticing going around, and I had a student teacher, and some of them, like something special was their blankie. I already saw the B, and I saw an L because we've had those sounds. Other kids scribbled, so that's their first attempt. But then there'll be another one coming up. There'll be another one in the spring. And to me, if you take their paper from the first prompt of writing to the last one, and I can tell you from many years that the last prompt of kindergarten in their writing, they've got a beautifully illustrated picture with color, detail, organization, and they write 1 or 2, maybe 3 sentences to go with that picture. So you take this, and you take the one at the beginning of the year, and you show the children. And they're embarrassed because I can't believe I did that. I didn't know even my name. But to me, that's what, somehow we've got to think of an assessment and I'm only speaking for kindergarten, but at 5 years old, when they can show you how much they've learned in the span of a year.
I was looking at the 3 things it says as student needs, school needs, and state accountability needs. And quite often there's a disconnect there. Not necessarily because the state accountability needs don't meet the student needs, but the culture and the understanding or the information. So believing that data or trusting that data is also an issue we have with older students. Please don't do SBAC at kindergarten.
No plan of that, by the
no.
way, just to be clear.
I mean,
or first grade,
no.
or second grade.
Vermont had our history of starting the Vermont DRA at the end of second grade
Right.
that ended when NECAP came in. And I just was talking to Janet Stewart at the end of that meeting, and we go back to DRA days as trainers, and then I went to the, at that time, Department of Ed in their assessment team. And part of that was teachers across the state calibrating together, knowing the materials, and it was one-on-one. I think it met the needs of the students and the needs of the teacher, and the teachers knew what the benchmark was for the end of second grade. So we had this assessment, but then we had the NSRE, so we tried to align them. They don't align. One's an individual assessment with I always said a nice lady sitting next to you. It could have been a nice man, but somebody was sitting right next to you with that, and you were comfortable. And NSRE was at 4th grade. It was different people, and the results were very different from bubbling into a test. So they weren't compatible as far as comparing, but I think that assessment, the DRA, and some people use the Fountas and Pinnell benchmark assessment now, which has all the way up to 7th or 8th grade. We get a text level in a environment that is comfortable, and we can use that data right then to teach. That's not going to necessarily fulfill state accountability because all of those teachers aren't calibrated. They all don't do it exactly the same way. So that state accountability needs, I think, is what is sometimes the black mark, even though I'm not against it, because I think we got very good data from the New England Common Assessment. And it was the first time, maybe not the first time, but it's the first time I was aware of all the disaggregation. So we could look at those children who maybe we were ignoring. And it's hard to accept, but there are children who were being ignored. And say, why isn't this population getting what they need? So I think whatever we have to be optimal, we're making sure that we believe in it as teachers so that when we give it in a good atmosphere and with a good attitude. And we let students know that we believe the results are going to help us as teachers, not just be a check mark for the state or something to be sent in, so that we're learning to look at that data in a way that's not threatening, but in a way that helps us. To me, that's optimal. And just getting a system of being comfortable looking at data. We spent last Friday with our professional development day looking at our primary observation assessment, because we're a reading recovery consortium. So I had all the K-1-2 teachers looking at the pie charts of the data that came in from the fall and from last May to say, we're saying, oh, this is the lowest class we've ever had in this particular grade, but let's look at last September. No, they're not. It's just we forgot what incoming kindergarten, first and second graders are because we ended the year. So looking at the data and having that feeling that it's telling us something about what we can do to teach is really important for an assessment system to be optimal, I think.
Can I add one thing? An important thing that I left off of my hopes and dreams of a balanced assessment system is student self-assessment. We just finished student-led conferences in our department last week. We use them as a diagnostic tool to see where students are at. Are they on track? Are they moving forward and progressing with their skills? Are they developing evidence as they need to? And it's one of my favorite times of the year because we get a chance to hear students talk about their work and how it measures up to the proficiency standards that we put in front of them. And they get to reflect on themselves as learners at this point in the school year. And self-assessment has to be part of every level of assessment, all the way up to the state level and the state accountability system. You really need to be listening to students tell you what they know. And there's probably a way to calibrate that, to standardize it some way so that you can compare across districts throughout the state. I know there are ways to do that, and that's a really important piece, is to be able to hear the students reflect on their own learning and tell you how much they've grown. And it's important in kindergarten, it's important when they're seniors and ready to fly.
Great.
And could I
Could
I add just one more thing too?
Sure.
Because on what you said, we use the POA and the PNOA for math as assessments.
Could you, for those of us that aren't involved in education, be a little more clear?
Yes, I'll tell you. The POA is literacy-based. It's the primary observation assessment. And it's a wonderful, wonderful assessment because, as you said, you protect the child's dignity. You sit with them, it's just the two of you, and you take your time. If the child is stuck, you give them time to think. There's no automaticity about it. They'll come out with it. The PNOA is the primary number and operation assessment. So we do a form of the PNOA. We've taken the PNOA, which is from the state, and we've just tweaked it a little bit so it doesn't take as long to administer to a kindergartner. But those are both excellent assessments, and they tell you a lot. They tell the teacher a lot about what they need to know, what we need to know. So,
John, this is not an easy subject, so.
Right. So we're thinking, in the interest of time, there's a couple of the questions that we received that we could probably just give you a short story answer on, and then open it up to see about other discussion. And before that, ask Michael to give us, in reflection of what we've heard, here this morning, what the future Smarter Balance assessment system looks like and where we want to go beyond there, but also to give a little visioning of what we would like to do beyond that, minus federal accountability systems. So just to first, we had a question posed about high stakes, and that has a couple different definitions, but the short answer on that is we do not consider any option of, in the future, using assessments as high stakes, meaning you must pass a Smarter Balance assessment in order to graduate. Massachusetts, a number of states do this. In New England, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. Rhode Island, one of the NECAP states, uses the NECAP as one of those measures of assessments. In our designs for the foreseeable future, anyway, we don't see that as, and that's our definition of high stakes. It may be different for others, but that these standardized tests would not be used as a high stakes gateway to graduation.
High stakes is also what you do to the school in terms of punishments or punitives or remedial or corrective action, teachers, faculty as well.
But our initial interpretation, just so we need some clarity, was high stakes, the way it's told pretty much in our world is students aren't able to graduate from high school. So this is what we needed to
I'm
find.
asking the other question.
Right, no, but I'm saying that our response, when we were looking at this, was not those high stakes, Bill. When we talk about high stakes, and we needed some clarification, so that's a good clarification. If you're talking about high stakes being also what are then potential actions, consequences, whatever the terminology might be to the districts, that may be another conversation that we might want to.
What's the answer to that question?
I can address some of those things based upon where we are at this point. And I would say, as I was framing out the questions and the answers and how we're going to approach them, one thing for the board to consider, and at the conclusion of whatever this conclusion of an assessment discussion is, I think it would be great for the board to consider some talking points in a briefing on what you, as the board, endorse, reflect, support, and really get very transparent. It would help us, and I think it would help the field to have some transparent leadership from the state board on vital issues such as this. So I hope that would be an endpoint of however long this particular discussion goes. In terms of other high stakes, we have held firm, and this board voted not to proceed any further with the NCLB waiver, because at that point in the negotiations, we were being pushed harder and harder towards a significant amount of the state assessment for federal accountability would be used in a teacher evaluation and principal evaluation system, and that was a non-starter for us and for this board. And I don't think we've changed from that. The task force that our Educator Quality Division is working on talks about student feedback and multiple measures of student feedback. While we won't be able to escape using some portion of that from our federally approved assessment system, we do not agree, and this board did not agree with using a significant portion of that. So that's teacher evaluations. The onerous consequences during this period of ramping up to reauthorization of ESEA, we as well, and this board as well, has spoken out many times against onerous consequences as we move towards a continuous improvement. So the system we're currently under has that tiered system of identification, corrective action, restructuring, that we have been able to navigate in the Vermont environment without closing schools, without taking over schools, without having some of those things that happen nationally. There was a particular point about a year and a half ago when I was at a meeting with school improvement grant recipients, and at the time we had taken that first cohort of school improvement grants. And this particular incident and discussion hit me that we are talking about significantly different issues. I was sitting at a table and we were asked by states, among the states, to share what we were using our school improvement grants for. And so from Vermont, we were talking about implementing better progress monitoring systems, informative assessment systems, and professional development, job-embedded professional development. And then the person from Minnesota was there, and they just shook their head and they said, that sounds great. We use the vast majority of our school improvement grants to recapture our schools from gangs. So there's a direct and contradictory purpose there for those funds, and I think that really begins to separate what we are doing in Vermont. We don't have failing schools, we don't have gangs taking over our schools, and we don't need to use school improvement funds to recapture our school buildings. So that is a starkly different environment that we're working in on a national level. But that's at this point moving forward, I think part of the leadership and vocal leadership of the board can help as we go into a reauthorization climate, working with our congressional delegation, who has been very supportive and very influential in allowing us to have some input there and actually make some changes to the Senate version, for instance, that they passed in ESEA. We were able to get an entry in there that allows a demonstration project for competency-based systems and performance assessments. So,
Putting aside the federal issue just for a minute, which I fully understand.
Just a
this.
minute?
Just a minute. And my frustration in this whole area, I mean, I know nothing about education, and I'm constantly running up against these various tools that are being proposed to use for assessment. How do we simplify this? How do we get it, so that so everybody understands what's going on? I mean, you're not going to like this comment, but if business ran their businesses the way this is being run, we wouldn't have any businesses in Vermont either. It's just, maybe I'm showing that I'm really stupid and don't understand all the various systems, but I just keep hearing all these various names, and I've stopped trying to learn what they mean.
We get a few acronyms for you.
Well, that's what I'm talking about.
But I do want to say that, when I worked at IBM, there was a bad product that was sent back to the distributor. When there was a product that something happened, it was sent back, they didn't pay for it. We have to accept all students and educate all kids. So when we talk about, comparing us to private business, I'd like to see for private business to have to accept any product that they order that may not meet their
Well, and I'm not proposing that when I use that.
I know that, but
I'm just expressing the frustration that there's too many things going on, and I can't imagine those of you out in the field how you deal with all this.
Well, I think the disconnect is the term that comes back to the public of failing schools, and we don't know how the measurement is. So when you say that you got a score of 252 on the whatever test, or the DRB was parents even don't understand what that means. I mean, even though the generations are changing and technology is catching up, we still don't explain ourselves, and so we get ourselves stuck in this measure of the not making AYP, the not making progress, and it translates to people that were not doing a good job. And I don't know how we get away from that.
Krista.
I worked at a failing school at Lamoille Union. We were labeled a failing school, and I can tell you that we were not a failing school. And what we were doing at that school, moving students forward, it was a great school to work at. It was a great community to be part of. But it was that test, and when it came out and said we were failing, then the community is like, well, you're a failing school. What are we doing supporting a failing school? So I think it is in the language. So Shamri, I really appreciate that we need to think about how we word these things. And with AYP, the common people don't know what AYP is. And it's teacher talk. It's education talk. And it is making it simpler. So going back to what Stephen said and making it simpler so the community can understand it, that they're not supporting a failing school, that they're supporting a really dynamic school that's facing lots of challenges through students living in poverty, that is a school that had the highest rate of foster students being placed into the school. So there were a lot of successes, but that's not reflected in those scores. And I think that's
It seems to me that, I set aside the federal issue for a moment, and I fully appreciate how big that is. But it seems to me that even in Vermont, we further complicate it by coming up with different systems and different means.
These people want to weigh in on your question, and I will later.
Say again?
These people want to weigh in on
Okay.
your question, I will later.
All right.
Well, I think the simplicity is what's grateful, but the test in some way is that simple answer because it grades you in a way in terms of categorizing you. But I do think communities understand performance when they see it. So when you have Mount Abe students giving exhibitions of what they've accomplished through personalized learning, the fact that they now understand, you can tell me some of those things, that they have a certificate as a first responder because they've gone through the course as part of their personal learning plan, or they now know about what it's like.
Yeah, welding certification or...
Yeah. So when those kids stand up and articulate that now I know I can do this, and these are the competencies I've met, the skills I've attained through that, acquiring that knowledge, that's powerful, and that's more powerful than standardized tests telling you you're an A and a B or a C. But what I think our issue is in Vermont is this issue of balance. So the name of the game is the standardized tests, right? They dominate the culture, the reporting. And Vermont values have supported the passing of this new legislation, the personalized learning plans and the multiple pathways. So if we let personalized learning plans and multiple pathways, if that's to become a reality, powerful programs like Luke's and like Carolyn's, then there needs to be some common performance assessment so that we can point to what kids are learning through these programs. If each school develops their own assessment for that, it's not going to be as powerful as something like Vermont Portfolio was by having a standard performance assessment. And then it brings a little bit of shifting balance back between the standardization and the personalization. And to me, it's kind of like having us saying, there's only so many hours in the day, right? So, and right now we're saying you can do it all. You can standardize and meet the Common Core and standardize, and you can personalize. It must make teachers' heads spin. It's like saying you can have a Walmart and a farmer's market on every corner. And maybe you can have the Walmart and the farmer's market on every corner, but when you're measuring what people are eating and weighing their performance based on what they buy at Walmart, then that's the end of the farmer's market. And Vermont values personalization. I think that was it shone loud and clear in those teachers today.
So, if I may, first of all, I just have to stress this. The Vermont Agency of Education has never, ever used the term failing school. We do not refer. The newspapers do that. We don't. So I wanted to reinforce that, and unfortunately we can't. I say that to the newspapers when they call me and interview me, and they still do it. And every time it happens, I want to call, and I have at times called and apologized.
We can't take care of journalism, so why don't you move on with your comment?
The way you present information can set up that failing schools mentality or not. And I think a lot of the federal language is, here's a cutoff. If you're above it, you're passing, and if you're below it, you're failing. That's too simple.
Right.
Stacy had
But I
something.
think we're back to that national contrast of, I think a school that is trying to regain control from gangs is probably, as an educational facility, approaching a failing point until they turn that around versus what we're doing. Unfortunately, in a federal blanket that gets thrown over everything, that's where the media pulls, oh, we saw that in Chicago, so it must be here. It's the same AYP. AYP here and AYP there is not meant to be, a condemnation of what we're doing in Vermont versus, probably time to get some gangs out of some schools. And
We're running out of time. I want to hear from Michael, and Bill has a point he wants to make, but I'd like to resolve this somehow when we leave here. We're not going to resolve the issue, but what's the procedure?
And again, if I may, I really haven't told you where we're going with the assessment system.
Okay.
And I agree with all the points folks have made here about the current system. And you're going to hear the new assessment systems is referred to as the next generation of assessments. And I actually, although this has been my life and my work, I found it, although these are issues that we've recognized all along that we needed to change. I'm heartened by what I heard from the teachers because, in fact, the things that they're saying are the things we're trying to accomplish with our new assessment system. And thank you, by the way, with starting with by using the words balanced assessment and referring to formative assessment, something that will set the smarter balanced assessment system aside from any other test that's ever existed or any that are currently under development anywhere else, is that it was built around this notion of balanced assessment. So it has three components. One is summative, which is the more typical used for accountability purposes. But it also includes an interim assessment, which is a tool that will be made available to teachers that they can use anytime they want during the school year, that will be customizable. So if they want to focus on just one of the standards or one group of standards, they can just look at that part of it. But the thing I'm really most proud of is because, and I've actually been working on this lately, is that we've committed about $27 million to developing a teacher's archive and training site around formative assessment. And it has three elements in it. It's first of all, it has an assessment literacy component that exposes teachers who aren't doing formative assessments now to various techniques that they can use in the classroom to work with their students. It also has a set of modules, about 25 modules, in each of the content areas that will show teachers examples of and give them information on teachers who are effectively using these strategies with their students. And then finally, there's an archive, and each state is now set up with committees to review these materials that are submitted by other teachers that have been field tested with real students, and teachers will be able to go there and get materials that they can use with their own students. So the key for Vermont, and the reason we were attracted to Smarter Balanced, was because it was developed around this notion of a balanced system of assessment that provides teachers with actionable data and also helps them get better at the kind of assessments that these folks have said are the kind of assessments we need. And I do want to remind the board that I don't think we heard any of the teachers today say that we should stop doing assessment. What they said is we need to do a better job of assessment, and that's exactly what we want to do.
I have a
Wait
specific
a minute,
question for you,
Stacy,
Michael.
you had your hand up earlier.
Sure. Well, I guess I had two thoughts. I think the word accountability is the issue. If I had to take one word, if we magically could remove the word accountability from our vocabulary, I think that would make a huge difference. I think it undermines the very trust that Secretary Designee Rebecca Holcomb was talking about. And then as soon, the Atlantic had a great article recently about Finland, and they said Finnish schools don't talk about accountability. I think right there we start with some assumption that someone's not doing something they're supposed to do. We're going to catch them doing it, and we're going to make it do it better. I don't think that's everybody's goal. I think everyone here has a much more generous goal in mind, but I think that word accountability drives that feeling of we have to suss out the failure and fix it. I think, although I agree it would be great if we had one measure, my reaction to that is also, since we know we have many, many different kinds of learners with many different eventual goals, there is no, if we're going to test this water bottle's goal is to hold water, so we have a test and it holds water, and that's good, but there's not one goal for our students. And so I think we have to, as messy as it is, multiple through many different kinds of measures and let our teachers tell us what those measures highlight. I agree, it's messy, and in terms of statewide accountability, I don't know the easy answer, but I would hate to get rid of the multiple measures for the sake of creating one goal.
Margaret?
Yeah, Michael, I know you've seen this, Linda Donlan-Hammond work in terms of traditional tests. Probably you would say the kneecap is here, and how Smarter Balance is one little move forward. And what I'm concerned about is true balance in terms of the scale. And with Vermont portfolios, we were way more over here. And things like the New York Standards Performance Assessment Consortium is doing work that's over here. And when can Vermont begin to do more work over here to capture the powerful learning in classrooms like Caroline's and other personalized learning programs around the state? And when can that begin? That's Vermont's work.
And actually that has already begun. Some of it through Smarter Balance, some of it that work that John has done with his counterparts in other states.
That's what I want to know about.
So,
I can tell you.
But again, please note that Linda's model does include Smarter Balanced, and I think our goal,
But yes,
and some of this we're already working
it's one little bit better than what
on.
we've got now. It's just one little bit.
Yeah, and one of the things that we're seeing is a serendipity of being part of this consortium, and the proficiency-based learning initiative that has been led by Paul Leather over in New Hampshire is a good example of this.
Yes.
That because we now have all these states working together, they're beginning to discuss ideas, and they're using Smarter Balanced as a platform for coming together around these other issues. So, for example, Smarter Balance provided a forum and some money so that states that were interested in proficiency-based models could come together and discuss if there are ways to use the interim assessments I mentioned or develop other things that that would get to that part of the model that we all want to get to. And there's no argument from us.
So things are moving, and we took a very strategic approach to some of this. At one point in a brief history, U.S. Department of Ed was not at all interested in hearing about performance assessments as part of the assessment scheme of competency-based systems. Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont pushed back as Smarter Balance members to say, we want some discussions about the Smarter Balance design and the framework of that to be assured that it will fit a competency-based system, because at least these 3 states are interested in moving towards that. Smarter Balance said, great, let's have that discussion. They put some money on the table and hired a facilitator, David Roof, out of the Great Schools Partnership. We put the word out to the Smarter Balance membership, and 14 states, including Vermont, joined that phase 1, and a document was produced. We're ready to put phase 2 in there to have that next level of discussion. Nellie Mae Education Foundation put some funding on the table and said, we will fund this if Smarter Balance matches it, and they in fact did, and we're ready to go into phase 2 of that. Simultaneous with that, Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont began a conversation in Congress, particularly in the Help Committee of the Senate, through Senator Sanders' office and others, and we pushed for whatever that reauthorization looks like needs to include opportunities for competency-based education and therefore performance assessments as part of that schematic. We didn't get what we initially asked for, but the version passed by the Senate allows up to 3 states as demonstration projects to put in competency-based education. That led to, I'm convinced, deliberately led to Achieve, who had gotten into some of the competency-based discussions in 2010 and 11 and had left those to move forward with Smarter Balance and Common Core. They dusted that off and as Margaret knows, invited a number of states, and Vermont was invited into that competency-based pathways, and they produced a document around that. So in a short period of time, it did get elevated to the national level, and now I'm hearing that in U.S. Department of Ed, they're saying, let's take a look at this. We need to know how this can work and what this might look like. So that is moving forward. We are anticipating an opportunity to gain some funding and move forward, particularly targeted at performance assessments. Rebecca and Armando and I have also engaged in a conversation where we will begin those conversations with the Center for Assessments, some professionals that Rebecca is working with out of a number of higher ed institutions and research areas, and move forward seeking those funds, and similar to where New Hampshire and Maine and other states have gone, develop a system of performance assessments. The goal there being to nudge the federal recognition of valid and reliable in Section 1111 of the current ESEA. Those definitions were written only applying to standardized tests, and we need to nudge that towards other assessment goals. So that's a snapshot of where we are at, where we intend to go very quickly, and those conversations and that work is already beginning. Bill?
This is encouraging news. At the same time, I think we're going to have to think very carefully and thoughtfully about this. And Stacy's separation of assessment and accountability is quite a good one, because what the teachers are saying, as we all well know, is 75% of the stuff that's important that a school should be judged on is not measured by a standardized test. And when we push performance assessments towards a standardized routine, they start losing reliability, and their usefulness and accountability system starts unraveling really quickly. And so what this gets me thinking is that we have to reframe the way that we think about an accountability system, which is not so based on metrics. That's part of it, but if you're talking multiple indicators, you can't put 15 of these things together and do a factor analysis and all of a sudden give a grade of A or through F. As Stephen is saying, the confusion is it's much more complicated than that. And I think where we've got to go in this discussion is to look at an accountability system which maybe, here's testing, this has a part of it, but it isn't this monolithic kind of thing. Each school is going to have its own very unique report, and it's a qualitative kind of thing rather than merely a quantitative thing. Mm-hmm. So that's a lot of work ahead of us.
And I agree with separating those 2 areas, and I've said a few times that what assessments were hijacked from educators and used as a public assurance model. Mm-hmm. And whether it's accountability or public assurance or whatever, and we need to return assessments to the classroom and to the educators, and maybe in that vacuum we need to create a public assurance model that public funding of education is done in a responsible manner, and is the returns. The accountability system, I think we've started to change that terminology to call it an educational system based on continuous improvement. And when we talk about flexibility in the federal realm, it's not Secretary Duncan's current definition of flexibility, which for us, as you saw, didn't amount to any flexibility. What we would like to move is an accountability system to
flexibility through rigidity.
Yes. So in the recent
They speak a
conversations.
different language than we do in Washington.
Well, yes, at times, very different. But if we can change the accountability conversation to continuous improvement governed and driven by educators, that's a great environment to be sitting in. And the flexibility that we've talked about with some of the staffers to get some language changed in the federal legislation is, when we talk about flexibility, let's be honest, the folks in Congress don't know how to fix this system. Some of us, if we spend, the time doing that, can come up with those solutions. Tell us what your outcomes want to look like in a federal legislation. Allow states to create a plan that would tell you in Washington how we intend to get there in a valid manner, and let us go do that work.
Well, let me ask a question of the board. I'm completely discouraged by Washington and not prepared to take that issue on. I mean, I hope at some point they.
It's tough right now to have that conversation.
Well, but I mean, Secretary Duncan and his word of waiver and what it means in Vermont and what it meant in his vocabulary were obviously two different things. So I think it'd be a waste of time for at least this board to take him on. But, so what I'm looking for is what can we do for the Vermont educational system within that restraint? And it's huge, I appreciate it, so that there's some consistent measurement and encouragement for students that makes sense. And now, so should we be encouraged by you talking about this next generation of assessment, let that happen and we respond to it? Or should this board be doing something else meanwhile?
I think we should look at, you're changing the language to assurance away from accountability, and I kind of like that notion. I think what we should do is look at how we want to measure schools or evaluate schools in this state, and look at that completely as a blank sheet of paper.
I agree. So the other thing that we're looking at is we're faced with reauthorization or another waiver, and I don't think we're going to get any more flexibility on a waiver. So we've got 2+ years by all estimates before ESEA comes up. I think we've got time to finish, developing the SBAC with influence from the competency-based issue. But we've got a short period of time, and say it's 2 years. If we don't develop what that next accountability or continuous improvement methodology is, we will be faced with a reauthorized bill that right now offers us two options. 100% proficiency by, say, 2025. That's what we've got. It didn't work. The second default option is closing achievement gaps by 50%, and that concept has never been proved. So part of our discussion as we move towards performance assessment systems is really to decide, with the Smarter Balance array of assessments, with the performance assessments, what would that next Vermont accountability system look like? Failing that, we're stuck with the defaults. So we've got a couple of years really to ramp up here before reauthorization at some point might occur, to say, here's the new accountability system, and it's based on Vermont values, and make sure that we're supported with good, solid modeling on that.
Auckland has a question. He wants to know if he's going to graduate with all these different standards.
On time or ahead of time?
I think one fear, I guess, so looking at when I was in kindergarten, one of the few things I remember from kindergarten was getting out before lunch every day. And it was 9/11, actually, was the beginning of my kindergarten year. And so I can still remember the whole day. And either that year or the year after, No Child Left Behind was passed. So I have, and this is the last year of NECAP at my high school, so I have done all the years of No Child Left Behind, and now next year, we'll be moving on from the NECAP assessment system to SBAC. Hopefully that will mean less projector screens of practice kneecap questions with the laminates.
Oh
and all
Lord,
that
I
stuff.
hope so.
Yeah.
And I'd like to know who those are, folks who are doing that in your school, because that's not anything that we encourage. Or
Oh yeah, I've done a lot of those in my, and so I've experienced a lot of curriculum narrowing. to meet standards. I've never attended a non-failing school. I feel like I've gotten about as good of an education that I could have gotten. I've had great teachers, great principals, great peers, and I've always been in a failing school. I think my fear when we look at the SBAC, which I think is great in a lot of ways, it tests more critical thinking. We've talked about this at previous meetings. But we look at the achievement gap, which is another priority of ours. When we go to a digital test, which I think is important, we're going to have to at some point. Like the less than 0.01% of all the data that human beings create makes its way to print. So we're going to have to assess students on their ability to process digital information, and that starts with the SBAC in a lot of ways. But I think in the first couple of years, I feel that it's going to, in a lot of ways, test like computer proficiency. So the tech coordinator at BUHS, my high school, took the SBAC pilot test or whatever it was, and she said that she had, she could see how a lot of students would have a hard time maneuvering through the test. I think one of the biggest mistakes that the state board can make, that the state can make, that other states can make, is 2 years out when students who come from impoverished backgrounds or don't have aren't computer literate, and they're scoring even worse than they might have on the kneecaps because the whole thing is just, over their heads. I think the worst thing to do is say, all right, well, what's next? Because we teachers, when I first started, I think it was pretty obvious that people didn't really know how to approach the kneecaps, so we put laminates on the board. And we said, all right, and you have 3 squares and, whatever it was. I think they started to figure it out. I don't really think kneecap was ever a great way. I don't think No Child Left Behind was terribly effective. But I think that it would be a big mistake to just flip 2 years in. And so I think we gotta, at some point.
Yeah, that's what employment's going to be like in your future and everyone else's. So there are schools, and we know that now, that where all their students aren't ready to take a test on computer. But we're hoping that this will help that move in that direction. Also along this line, that we've in Smarter Balance, we've kind of reconceptualized what we mean by reading, so that research becomes part of that. That we know effective human beings right now are going to the internet for information, and so that's now become part of what we think of when we think about reading, and that will be a component of this test. And just finally, I agree with you, Stacy. I hate that word, accountability. I think it gives my test a bad name, quite frankly. But I do again, and this will be the last comment I leave with the board, but I'd really like to encourage the board to think about this word that came up a number of times today, about balance. I really can't, there's very few human enterprises I can think of where we don't set standards and measure them. I mean, buildings would fall down if we didn't have building inspectors and if we didn't have standards for architecture and so forth. When you go into a restaurant, you go in with the assurance that the Board of Health has been there and they're making sure that there isn't rat poop in the flour, for example. And maybe that's the only purpose.
Oh, we don't need that line in the
purpose
minutes.
I think so too.
So again, I think that there's a role for assurance, and that would be one piece of assessment, but we can't be satisfied with that. So rather than, and thank you again, Lachlan, for saying this, rather than throwing out the standardized test, I'm hoping what we're going to do is find a proper place for it, to not put on too much emphasis, and do like we do with restaurants. We rely on the Board of Health, but we also rely on newspaper reviews, and we rely on word of mouth from other people who've eaten there, and we bring that all together to make a profile of the restaurant or of the school.
Bonnie.
I would like to just say that I think where the board is headed, and certainly in terms, not the board, the Agency of Education, particularly as it relates to moving toward this growth model, and it was certainly evident this year in terms of how schools were recognized in terms of making progress. Even those schools who didn't make AYP, there was a recognition of the hard work. Absolutely headed in the right direction. Because that's exactly what, when we're looking at a growth mindset and we're telling our kids that that's what we want them to do, and it's about progression and it's about learning, to actually have it recognized by the department was really, really helpful. And it was really helpful in, talking to my teachers about, the hard work we've been doing for the last, 3 to 4 years is actually paying off. And this arbitrary sort of cutoff doesn't really mean much as long as we can show that we're making growth. And so I would encourage you to continue that. I think that's the conversation we should be having with parents. That's a conversation that we should just be continually having over the course of time. And we know it totally fits with all of the brain research that's been happening. And we want our kids to know that they're in school for a reason. They wouldn't, if they knew everything, or they didn't need to be in school, there would be no reason for them to be there. But the growth mindset and the continuous improvement is absolutely, what we're doing, we can continue to do better. I think is really absolutely the message that the agency should be sending to everyone. And I would encourage you to get ahead of the curve around the accountability piece, because that scares me in terms of where we might end up without us being, I think we should be in control of where we go with accountability. So I would support the direction that you're in.
That's great.
Can I just
All right.
tag on to Bonnie real quick?
Sure.
So I think, Bonnie, you're absolutely right. I think I'd love to hear, I love what the agency is doing so far, but I think, Stephen, to your question, what do we do? I think we need to be riding that same train. So as a state board, I love that idea that the assessment shouldn't be a public reassurance program. We should be the public reassurance program. I think as a state board, if we looked at ourselves as like a PR committee, that's what we should be doing. And I think that's a great way to figure out what our charge might be going forward.
We're running over here. Stacy, quickly, and then John, and then Armando will wrap up the session on this agenda item.
Well, to also add on to that, when we look at this continuum, I think actually this is happening in the state of Vermont. It's just not being assessed at the state level.
Right.
So if we're at level 2, the state level, and do we need it to go higher at the state level and add more assessment? I think that's what we need to decide as a board too.
Yes.
Or do we have trust, going back to Rebecca, do we have trust in our teachers that this is happening? And then we just work on how we interpret those scores at the level 2.
Or tell us how to report them.
Right, and
Yeah,
'cause
just
that's the
tell us
hard
what to
part.
do.
The best assessments.
Honestly, with that,
Yeah, I mean, I know as a teacher, the best assessments aren't the ones that I can report and maybe compare to another school, because you get to know your students. And that furthest one, when they're creating their own projects, well, that's the best part about teaching.
And
But how
that's
do you-
what's serving your community.
Yeah, and how do you do
That's
that
what
as
we
a
should be
state?
doing, yeah.
And
John?
say everybody has to do this. That's the hard part.
So there were a couple of things here we didn't get to that the board had questions on.
Yeah.
One of the big ones was the standard setting or the cut score
Yeah.
establishment of SBAC. Michael is directly involved with all that work. Would you prefer to go through that, or would you like to receive that written answer to that particular question?
Written answer would be.
I think at this point, perhaps a written answer, but knowing that it'll be on the agenda
Yeah.
at some point in the near future. I mean, we entered this conversation realizing that we were not going to resolve anything today. I think maybe we got even a little further apart than where I thought we were, but,
Same page.
this is clearly something that we need to work with the
Your happy
agency and resolve. It's a huge issue. Mr. Secretary, closing comments.
Yes, but one of the things, and I believe Carol made copies of this for everyone, was the Smarter Balanced contract that we signed, the memorandum of understanding that Felice Miller, the board chair, signed, that Governor Jim Douglas, the governor, signed, that talks about the responsibilities of the states as well as the responsibilities of the consortia. So
We don't have that, I don't.
you will, I think Carol sent it out. Oh, you have copies of it. So you may want to look at that as a good foundation for the next discussion. So, just so you know what your governor and the state board agreed to at that time. So I'm not going to get into it now, but this is a good document that has something in there. And I think particularly look at responsibilities of the states in the consortium and the responsibilities of the consortia. And just in closing, the issue of accountability, let's call it what it is a federal law that requires states to have accountability systems. We are part of a 50-state nation, so we are required to go along with these laws. Does it mean that we can't push back? Does it mean that we have not been pushing back for the last 5 years? Why we didn't go for a race to the top? Why we participated in the school improvement grant? I'm not using acronyms, I'm using, not SIG, school improvement grant for more than 1 year. Why we have not gone for the waiver, and why we have had, John and I, some toe-to-toes with the folks at the federal agency, with Senator Sanders with us, because we don't see that as the way to go. we would have been waiting for the reauthorization to occur at some point that would be more humane. But I just want to say, NCLB identified a core group of kids that no matter how much we talk about individualized assessments in classrooms, however, there were many, many kids that were not being provided what they needed and were not being counted. So what NCLB did was identify minority students, subgroups, all those other areas. How the federal government went about it is not something I agree with, but I think it's now raised the level, as Lindy was saying, that it's for all kids. What we have been advocating at the federal level, and Secretary Duncan, I believe, would like to maybe go this way, but is maybe unable to or doesn't necessarily agree with it all. But how do you look at multiple measures? Going back to what John was saying, tell us where you want us to be. Having common core, having common standards across the country levels that playing field a little bit. Having at least a couple of assessments that are aligned to those helps at least for that accountability. However, it should not be the only measure. Chris has talked about, others have talked about, classroom assessments. You know, we've eliminated the teacher's voice from accountability, and to me, that's a huge, area of neglect on the accountability part. Standardized tests are part of it. We spend in Vermont $1.5 billion in education a year for under 80,000 students. We have to have some sort of accountability system for that. But the SBAC assessment, talking SBAC where we're going, should be another one. We should be looking at graduation rates. We should be looking at attendance rates. Those are easy. Participating in extracurricular activities is another measure of students who are engaged in school who are doing well. Looking at dual enrollments, looking at internships, applied learning, demonstration of their knowledge with the capstone projects that so many schools are going to. A new one, which I've sort of added, that foreign language acquisition, which this board, many, many years ago, Carol, remember, voted to require all students who graduate from high school to have an intermediate level of a single foreign language. Never happened, but that's another area that, as an accountability system, we can incorporate into our state accountability. Did the students take the highest level of courses that they were able to take, regardless of whether they're in Rochester High School that has 44 kids or Essex High School, which has 1,400 kids? What is the highest level of course that kids took? So when we look at all of these things, and teacher observation, I think, Diane, you mentioned that very well. Teacher observations are huge. Can we take all of these measures to come up with an accountability measure that is truly holistic, that helps identify when students are struggling and what those struggles are so we can meet them? At the same time, it provides the community who is paying the taxes for all our schools, because we're in a statewide educational tax rate system now, the assurance that we're not looking at a single measure, but we're looking at a really broad definition of what it means to be a student who is struggling or successful or everything in between. Get away from all this stuff about the, I'm not even going to get into the whole teacher evaluation piece, because that's a separate area that we have chosen not to go to. And that higher ed, colleges, four-year schools, whatever is looking at students' assessment results, the total picture, as part of their application process, whether it's for college or two-year school, whatever it is. Because we're not, if it was all based on a single measure, SAT scores, I probably wouldn't be sitting here. I chose a school to go to, Leslie College, that didn't require GREs. Okay, so you're not talking to somebody who supports standardized assessment. That's a single measure that I probably wouldn't be where I was today if it were required to be a single measure. So how do we make sure that we can set up an accountability system that is thoughtful, relevant, but also reliable at the federal level? The federal government right now has lost trust in states. You've been talking about this for 20, 30 years. Why haven't things improved? So now we're going to come down with a more draconian system, NCLB. Like it, don't like it, that's what we have. We can transition and evolve into a more humane and more comprehensive assessment system, but we need the federal government to go along with that. Because if they continue to be on a single measure, we have two choices, Vermont. We can drop out of the union, okay? I mean, not the 50 states union, but drop out of the accountability union. I know there's some people, and go ahead, join my colleagues in Cuba who are starving, okay? Or we can help make a change. And John and Rebecca, who's following me, along with Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Wisconsin, California, there are many states out there. If you read Politico today, there's an article about the states that didn't go for a waiver. Denise Juno from Montana, Kirsten from North Dakota, all these folks who are in the same boat we're in. We're trying to get the federal government to look at a much more comprehensive system. A single measure is not the way to go, and I agree with everyone who says that's not the way to go. How do we help them see that the type of program that Vermont is talking about for a statewide accountability system should be the same one at the federal level, so that we don't have one at the federal level and one at the state level? And that may be the next 2.5 years, as John's saying, before NCLB gets reauthorized, if there could be that national sort of emphasis by both the Democrats and the Republicans that the right thing to do is to not have a single measure be the determining factor whether a school, a child, a state is considered to be successful or struggling. But let's look at the big picture. So I think that the agency is really moving in the right direction. We are challenging where we can. We are fighting back. We are not participating when we don't see it meeting our needs. But I don't know if we can continue that if the next reauthorization continues to require. And if we choose, I said the other pieces, we drop out of participating, and then are we willing to look at losing $100 million in state funds, but still be required to do certain things? So I think that's a decision that you all and our elected officials will have to make down the road. But right now, I believe that the agency and Michael and John and others are really moving in the right direction. Will you agree with everything we do? Of course not. But the intent is to get away from that single measure and to move forward.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. You may go home feeling like, what was that all about? But it really was quite helpful.
Thank you for hearing us.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you very much.
Lunch is going to be served at
Diane, thank
12:15, so I'm going to continue with the agenda for a few minutes anyway. Are there members of the public that wish to be heard on items today? Yes.
Came today to speak for parents who can't come to board meetings because they're busy working. I've heard from a great number of parents in Vermont whom I've never met, who ask me for advice on how to opt their kids out of the state test. And this put me in a very difficult position because I don't want to be any kind of agent that's working against a principal or a public school. And yet I want to help parents. I understand their individual problems, and what I found in talking to them is that the principal seems to have the sole control over whether a student can opt out or not. Some parents told me that principals respected and honored their decision. Another parent was barraged with messages from school counselor and teachers about what a terrible human being she was to even consider such a thing. Another parent was told, you can keep your kid out of the tests, and whenever he returns to school, he will be tested. This seems to me to be a very odd system for encouraging good community relations, and I don't really know what the answer is. I'm just coming here to tell you that I feel very frustrated getting these messages and trying to be very supportive of public schools. I did explain to them the NCLB rule about the numbers game, but that's not a very satisfying answer to parents who have individual reasons for wanting to opt their kids out. But I do want to say something very positive too. I am so happy that I came today and that you honored this place-based education going on. I talked to a lot of the students over there. They are so articulate about why they're there. Every one of them told me that program has changed their lives, have saved their lives. And I was very touched in particular by one student. I said, well, do you have any idea what you might like to do? And she says, very enthusiastically, I'm going to be a tattoo artist. And I just offer that as an exclamation when we're talking about the competitive workers in the global economy. Let's please remember the Vermont young woman who wants to be a tattoo artist. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I have a question.
Good morning, I'm John Castle, and I'm here as a parent and an educator both. I appreciate the opportunity to address the State Board today, but I also want to personally thank Armando for his service and leadership as Commissioner and our first Secretary of Education. I know at times I've been difficult, but I know we share the same interest in success for all students. I recognize the many challenges of your position and hold sincere respect for you as a fellow educator and your many contributions to the children of Vermont. Today, I wish to briefly share some thoughts with the State Board that I suspect others in the field share regarding a misguided approach to school assessment and accountability. So I'm sorry if I'm redundant in some of the things already said. I thank the State Board of Education for pushing back on the federal government when possible. I am glad we did not ultimately request a waiver, that we do not have high-stakes testing for students and use statewide assessments for teacher evaluation. Your commitment to sensible practices and willingness to challenge the unproductive and damaging practices imposed by the federal legislation is essential. My daughter should be returning to class right about now after opting out of kneecap testing for the last 3 days. We came to this determination to participate in a simple act of civil disobedience after much consideration. Her genuine disappointment in not being able to attend a truly exceptional learning experience in her vocational program was the impetus for our lengthy conversations. I know her reaction was sincere as I've watched her work on projects until 10 o'clock at night, even on Friday evenings. She is clearly motivated and self-directed in her learning. She knows that her learning and worth as an individual is not reflected on a test score. She takes this action very seriously and accepts the consequence that her non-participation will be reflected on her transcripts. We mean no disrespect to Middlebury Union High School and feel it is unfortunate this action has a negative impact on the overall scores and AYP determinations. We do not wish to denigrate Middlebury Union High School and sincerely feel bad our current system does. It was disappointing to receive our school did not meet AYP letter just before the start of the school year. Letters of this nature I refuse to send as a superintendent because they cannot but convey to parents we are a failing school. Middlebury is not a failing school. I am not disappointed in Middlebury Union High School. I am disappointed that such a letter is required. Middlebury, like all schools in the Northeast and other schools across the state, need a culture of continuous improvement. They do not need public shaming. We know we have a system that is flawed and all but ensures every school will eventually have to send out these letters. Letters such as these or news reports like the one I saw this weekend on the news reporting on kneecap science scores erodes public confidence in our schools and only demoralizes teachers and principals who are working incredibly hard to improve learning outcomes. On the surface, it would seem it is heresy to speak out against NCLB and accountability for student outcomes. NCLB was promoted to shine a light on the soft bigotry of low expectations and promote equity. Perhaps in some cases, in an urban context, this may be true. I believe in Vermont, the unintended consequence is that we have denigrated those communities with higher concentrations of poverty. How many times must special educators, like my wife, attempt to cajole or even console those students who only find reinforcement of their academic deficiencies? How much longer will we do the same for entire schools? The Elementary and Secondary Education Act was born out of the war on poverty. At times, especially with a decrease in funding at the federal level, it seems as if we have shifted to a war on the poor and those schools dedicated to serving our most needy students and communities. At some point, one can only draw the conclusion that the national reform movement is a promotion of the educational industrial complex focused on selling more tests, more programs, Common Core aligned, and ultimately dismantling public schools. The fact that we have relatively flat results over the past decade of state assessments would indicate that lots of testing does not change outcomes, narrow ones at that. We know Vermont scores well on the National Assessment of Educational Progress, and in many respects can tout a world-class education. None of the nations considered high-achieving assess students to the extent we do. There are promising aspects to the Common Core. If approached sensibly, they will promote sound and well-rounded outcomes of communication, collaboration, creativity, and critical thinking through a pedagogy of increased personalized learning, interdisciplinary learning, and project-based learning. I fear an over-reliance on quantifiable outcomes measured with an assessment that once again will ultimately be designed to sort and rank will not promote the kind of learning we need for our students in the current world. Our own Agency of Education promotes a progressive transformation of education, and the current education quality standards under consideration go a long way to advancing a positive change in focus and practice. I fear the Smarter Balance assessments will not live up to their name and only reinforce a narrowing of the curriculum, a sense of failure, and negative perception of the community. I embrace the use of data to improve instruction and outcomes. I am accountable to my boards and community. We already use multiple indicators and evidence of learning outcomes. We cannot allow large-scale assessment to determine what is of greatest value. I am proud of the history and character of Rutland Northeast and those who have challenged wrongful public policy in the past. I refuse to remain complicit in the wrongful practices that are imposed upon our schools. This is why I've opted my daughter out of testing. I would opt Rutland Northeast Supervisory Union out of testing if we were not held hostage by the threat of a loss of funding from the federal government or even our own state. I accept the personal and professional consequences of my actions. I accept responsibility for the culture and practices that will support improved outcomes for students in my communities. I accept the responsibility for my child's education and all of the children in Rutland Northeast. I accept responsibility for what students should know and be able to do, but I'm equally responsible for fostering who my daughter and my son and all children will become. Educators know that if we are waiting for NECAP scores to make meaningful adjustments to support a child's learning, we have waited too long. I believe the same can be said for large-scale assessments from a school or state perspective at this point. And if we are waiting for the federal government in some new reasonable direction from reauthorization of ESEA, we will wait too long. It is my hope that the State Board, Agency of Education, even Governor Shumlin, will join with our congressional delegation and other leaders from other states to push back on the federal government and demand assessment practices that will fulfill the promise of our students, our schools, our communities, our state, and our country. I think our focus needs to be on one of advocacy and less on accountability. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
I have a question.
Yes?
Okay.
John?
I wanted to ask you, and just follow up briefly. I also struggled this year with trying to decide whether or not I should opt out of testing because I really didn't personally believe in it and think that there's things we should value more, like a sense of creativity and wonder and honesty and integrity and all these wonderful things that students aren't being measured on these tests. And I was all ready and had a note from my mom saying that I was gonna opt out. And I ended up deciding at the last minute that in my small school, Twinfield, with like 430 students, pre-K through 12, that I was too big of a percent to just throw away and do that to Twinfield, and that it really meant more to me to help my school than to just represent my personal beliefs. And so I just found it really interesting and would like to know a little bit more about how you and your daughter came to that conclusion.
Well, we struggled with that a great deal.
Maybe you could have this conversation
Yeah, that's
during the
fine.
break. I'm not sure this is a board level, but I would definitely encourage you to continue the conversation. Margaret?
So it's a question about if a parent wishes to opt out, what is the language that a principal will say? I mean, it seems to be, according to Susan, a lot of variability. In some cases, they accept the parent's letter and say thank you, but in other cases, they say when the kids comes to school, they're taking the test anyway. So what's the rule from that principal should follow?
Armando?
The message is that this is the law. So my message has been to principals when they've asked is that if the student chooses not, if they come to school, they have to take the test. If not, they need to be unexcused absence for that day of school.
Okay, but they don't have to do the test when they come back?
Well, the school, as Morgan mentioned, there are some potential ramifications of the school because we have to have 95% of the attendance for school. So it actually hurts the school, but we can't make anybody do anything. But there are consequences to that student, so they would get unexcused absence is 0. And if you're then above a certain number of unexcused absence, it becomes a truancy issue, which would be silly over something like this. But Margaret, I think those are there's not something we say, oh, we're going to go bring them in. They have to. The parents make a choice, and it's not like, my issue is that, I don't particularly like driving 65 miles an hour, okay? But it's the law, and I have to do it. If I don't do it, there's some consequences. I think the same thing is.
Well, we're not going to get
I
into
know,
whether
I know.
who speeds
So,
and who
Margaret-
doesn't.
Oh, I don't speed, by the way.
Bill?
So I'm just worried about mixed messages depending on what town you live in.
Can I just say this
When you
as a
say
principal?
when you say it's the law, I believe the law is absolutely silent on opting out, both state and federal rule and regulation.
Our interpretation of the law, Bill.
It's silent. That's your reading. You have to read into
But people
that.
have interpretations of law all over the place. Talk to 2 lawyers and give them the same thing, and they'll each give you a different
State
interpretation.
issue.
I'm concerned about parents getting mixed messages from principals, and I think it's something that the state could.
No,
No.
I don't think so.
What-
I mean, as a
what's the-
principal, I
what's-
will tell you that I had one parent who wanted to opt out. That's fine. If I had 5 or 6 parents who wanted to opt out, my response would be different, because it does affect our accountability, and that's what we're up against. And as a school that hasn't made AYP, I would probably respond differently. So I think you will always get answers that will vary depending on the
Where you
circumstances.
live, the town you live in.
Absolutely. So a small school like Twinfield, that makes a huge difference. I have 400 kids, so I can sort of weigh what might be happening.
In a smaller grade span than.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I don't know how you dictate that, but I think most principals want to be responsive and, and say yes to parents. But sometimes a conversation might, I understand, but let me explain why this is important to where we are, even if you're not happy about it.
Okay, the board will stand in recess until 1:15, and Carol, we are going to lunch in what direction? Okay, Carol passed out the Smarter Balance Consortium that was referred to earlier in the morning, so this is, I don't mean to resume the conversation, but this is for your review.
Let's be clear.
One question, did the board ever act on this in June 2010? They signed it, but I don't know, Sean Marie needs to be here for this conversation.
I would assume if she signed it, then we must have taken some action, and
I wouldn't. Sean Marie was looking for the actions on these things. and
Okay.
They could not be found.
oh. Well, you're, depending on my memory going back to June 1910, you're looking at the wrong person.
Yeah, it's not on the web either.
Huh. Well, we'll wait for,
That's a question for Carol.
okay. Are there board announcements? Not hearing or seeing any, we'll move on. The chair doesn't have anything exciting to report as well. I did meet, I'll just tell you briefly, I had a nice hour-and-a-half meeting with Rebecca Holcomb yesterday, and we talked about a lot of things in general, and I was very encouraged by the conversation, and she seems to be really reaching out and meeting with a lot of the educational partners. And as you probably heard her, she quietly said that she will be taking over on January 1st. So she has lots of things that she's trying to finish up at Dartmouth. Bill?
Just in other kinds of announcements, did talk with the GAC people and sent them an email on the effects of the federal meltdown and what's going to happen. And Vaughn, you may know more about this than I, and Bill's not here yet. Apparently, we're okay on Title I and special ed money for right now, but if the great deal is struck, it could involve Title I and special ed for the future, and if that money is cut back in some grand deal, then God only knows what's going to happen.
Could you repeat the last?
You didn't hear that?
God only knows what's going to happen if the feds swap away Title I and special ed. John's got his hand up. He apparently knows something beyond what I know.
Only no details, but when a continuing resolution passes, it's likely to incur a cut, effective either immediately or July 1 again. That's
There's some,
the first-
excuse me for interrupting, but I thought, isn't there another sequester January 15th?
And that's the second strike is the second of 10 sequesters in March, April, which is, in the 3 to 8% range.
And we have effectively lost money that goes out to the local school districts in SPED and Title I now.
Both were cut not as much as we had thought originally. Some funds are at a hold harmless, so nutrition is hold harmless. Perkins for the CTE centers is at state minimum. 21C programs are at a state minimum, so some of those weren't cut at all. Title I was cut depending on the levels in IDEA. So we have the amount of each cut by most of the grants at this point from last year. But right now, we don't know. The CR could have an additional cut and then a second sequester, and we have 8 more sequesters after that.
And local school districts will be making their budgets by going on.
Yeah. Tough season to be in with that, yeah.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
The only thing I think Bill Talbot would want me to add is, in terms of our immediate situation, Kathy Flanagan drew down every nickel we could get our hands on of federal money the Thursday before the shutdown. So we should be able to hold on about as long as anybody. Every precaution that we could have taken, every initiative we could have taken was taken.
That's good news, thank you. Any other board announcements?
On Tuesday, myself and something like 10 or 11 other Twinfield students were really lucky to host a group of students from New York City, from 5 different schools in there, and also a group of, I believe, 8 people from Lowell, Massachusetts. And we took them on a quick little hike and showed them around our school, and then we built a fire and just hung out with them. And then the next day was a conference at Capitol Plaza in Montpelier, where Marjorie Ginsburg was our keynote speaker, and we were very honored to have her. And it was great. I got to go with a yachts team from Twinfield, and I think it was very productive.
You want to tell everybody what a yachts
Oh
is?
yeah, yachts. Youth and Adults Transforming Schools Together. That organization and their sort of umbrella organization, Up for Learning, was who held the conference on last Wednesday.
Okay. Bill, you want to give us a brief report on the legislative committee, which met by phone?
Okay, I noted the word brief there. We'll work on that. Do you have copies of the minutes in your packets, or look sort of like this?
No.
Nope. Okay. Basically, what we talked about were 2 major things. One was staffing needs and budget for the State Board of Education. It might be good. Bill Talbot said he'd come back.
He's coming back for the legislative committee meeting after this meeting.
Okay. He was also going to work on a budget spreadsheet to send over to the governor, and basically we agreed on a policy analyst position, to ask for a policy analyst, legal support and administrative support, which would be for the policy analyst, pay grade 25, step 2, administrative support at 70%, grade 22, step 11, and contracted legal services at $30,000 rather than a staff person. It's just have some funds available to go to specialists as necessary. And our timing was excellent. We had the committee report right before the governor's newspaper announcement that agency funds will be leveled across state government. So we're going to be facing that. And one thing we talked about, and we'd like your sentiment on is whether you support the independent positions. This is basically what we asked for last year.
Yeah, a little, maybe for new board members, a little history. When Act 98 was passed, we made the assumption in that the state board was no longer running the department/agency, that our staffing would be independent. And I think, in fairness, members of at least the education committees in the legislature, in the sense I got, thought that was what was happening too. So last year, or 2 years ago, we spent a fair amount of time putting together budgets, and pretty much for the positions that Bill is talking about now. And I think on an annual basis, the cost would have been $256,000. And so I wrote a very nice letter to Jeb Spalding, telling him that we would be submitting this budget request, along with a budget adjustment request that would have covered 6 months. And as some of you will recall, Jeb wrote back very nicely and said, "What are you talking about? You know, the agency will still staff the State Board of Education," which they have done, in all fairness, very well. But, you know, the question is, that Bill's putting before you is that, do we want to pursue that again? And if so, how actively do we want to pursue it?
Carol is just passing out the spreadsheet of what these things cost here, and you can see the positions listed down below. And the total budget would go to $262,000, up from $76,000, which is rather significant percentage increase. But the question becomes, do we want to ask for this particular level of funding? Now, the committee was saying yes, and also is to note in the chairman's language in the cover letter going over is that we'd talk to the legislature depending on how things go, and of course phrased properly. And
I think the difference this year might be, I would expect the administration probably would respond the same way they did the time before. So I think the decision we're making, either here or at a subsequent meeting, is that, yes, the protocol is for us to go to the administration, but if that is not received warmly, then are we prepared to go to the legislature and look for this funding?
that's basically the question before you.
And just a clarifying question. So I know this is the cost on the year 14 budget is for just sort of just cost when you're going here, but doesn't account personnel. So taking into account the personnel that works with us at the agency, what would that total to in a cost? So what's the cost comparisons? Is there a huge savings in using the agency, or actually be more effective?
Actually, what you're looking at, the $76,000 is our expenses with the agency.
With the agency.
With the agency serving the board. The $263,000 is with independent staff and other expenses for the board.
And I think that probably Carol's salary is carried in the department budget because it doesn't show here. Is that correct?
No, paid by the agency. Right.
That's the
She's an
thing.
agency, yeah, that's a hard, you're right, Bill, that's a good.
Right,
Yeah.
so-
But if we're using agency staff, it's still being paid for. They're not able to do something else for the agency if they're doing it for the board, right? So Carol's not able to do certain things for the agency if she's spending X amount of time doing it for the board. So it's a cost, whether it's in this budget or whether it's in the agency budget, and the agency budget has already been cut, right?
Yeah, I think if I follow your logic, if we were to receive the $263,000, the agency probably would be reluctant to see the equivalent amount reduced from their
Right,
budget.
right.
Because of the needs that they already have over and above
Right.
us.
Yeah.
Bill, we're kind of springing this on the board.
We're trying to get some copies of the legislative piece.
Could this decision wait until the November meeting?
Well, the only deadline, and Armando would know the answer to this one, is when is a budget request due to the governor?
Sometime in November. So your board meeting is November 19th. It's gonna be close.
Really close.
But I think, Bill, as you know, there'll still be other portions of the state budget that may not be completely submitted. So I'm gonna have a conversation with Jim Reardon anyway about something else. So I would say that the board may not be coming back with their budget, or we can give them a preliminary number, so at least he has a number, and then after the 19th with something that is a little bit more concrete. Does that
Well,
work?
that makes sense.
Yeah. So at
Well,
least he has something.
but we ought to get a sentiment from, the committee really needs the thoughts of the remaining board members, whether you want to approach independent staff or you want to live with what we have been doing for the last couple of years. Tracy?
I guess my question would be, and obviously being newer, I don't maybe have the same historical lens, but recognizing that the role of the board has changed a little bit with the role of the commissioner to secretary, and the conversation we had the other day where the conversation of if we don't control the purse strings, we're policy making, we're not in charge of execution, we're not. I would feel maybe slightly uncomfortable going to the legislature with this huge ask without being very, very clear about what are the reasons the board should exist and at this level. Does that make sense? I think we're going to be calling for scrutiny on the role of the board. If we don't play these other roles anymore, then what is all this money for? Does that make sense? So I think I would just want to make sure that we were very, if we're ready to bring that light on it, that's probably great. It would kind of push for some definition about the role the board has, but I think it would also just make me, I just think we need to be clear because it's a big number.
That's the difference between
That's a good point.
being involved as this transpired and coming in
Yeah.
at this point, because I believe, at least my understanding from many of those meetings, at least at the House level, maybe at the Senate level, was that we would be an independent board functioning as an independent board. And clearly it puts, people like Mark or any kind of analysis that we want independent of the agency, it creates for some very awkward moments. And who do they, clearly, the staff at AOE report to Armando, who reports to the governor. They have no, I'm not saying there's been an issue at all, but I think that the idea when we first brought this up, and it was discussed even by the House legislators, was that it would in fact be staffed separately. And that was all of our understandings, I think even Armando's, right, going forward.
Yes.
Is that we would be an independent agency with an independent budget, with independent counsel, with independent analysts to function as an independent board. But that wasn't Jeb's idea when Stephen sent him the letter.
That's really helpful. So we're not just talking about who's paying for what.
No, it's
but
more-
it's the
it's
whole.
bigger than that.
Great, that's really important. Thank you.
Mark?
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and thanks for, what you had to say there, Sean Ray, because I am coming at it from the same position that Stacy's looking at it from, and I understand that, and I guess the only other piece that I would add to it is I'm always sensitive when we have large changes within organizations about moving too many pieces at one time, and sometimes, not changing too much can help in transition, and I think it'll get to the point of if we don't ask for this amount and kind of keep our relationship with the Agency of Education maybe for one more year, we've got a new secretary in place, the board is still relatively new, it's not that old, and let's not force people to have to make some of those decisions, and Stephen or whoever, when they go and talk and ask for some more money, play that up more and maybe get something that they can throw us our way. But I would be hesitant to ask for, or to go to the legislature myself at this stage of the game.
So just, again, for timing's sake, the first year was mid-fiscal year. So we came at this in January, and the budget went to June 30th. So we had FY '13 for half a year, and it was prorated in the previous budget pieces of paper we got up until June 30th. Then FY '14, which is what you're looking at in the left-hand column, is exactly a carryover of 13, in that we're using agency staff, and you don't see those lines at the bottom. So this is transition into third fiscal year. And so I see your point, but I totally see your point, but we're actually we're proposing the third fiscal year of the transition.
I
So
get
just
it.
so you.
No, I get it, and like I say, my mind is, I get what you're saying.
I know, I'm just trying to, again, put the pieces in place so that you understand that we're, right now, completely one full year plus the previous year, and we're looking ahead to the next fiscal year.
Maybe this only is irrelevant, I'm not sure, but when we went to them last year, we were looking for an FY '13 Budget Adjustment Act starting April 1st is when Act 98 went into effect. So that was a total of $76,000 that we're asking for FY '13. And then we asked for the full $261,000 for FY '14, which is the current budget we're in. So that doesn't provide any more clarity, I don't imagine, but.
Well, the other way of looking at it from that is the longer we operate on this budget and manage, the more difficult it is going to be to get to the other budget. But the catch is, if we were successful and got this budget, would they be robbing the department to pay for it? And we don't want that to happen. So how do you position this so that they see that this is the creation of something new, not making do with what we've had historically?
Well, what I guess I would, let me interrupt this discussion just for a moment for a very important item, I think. We have the folks in the back of the room who are responsible for one of the most wonderful lunches the State Board of Education's ever had. So we want to take a minute and thank you.
We'll have every meeting here.
Thank you, it was wonderful.
Mr. Melville, is that your name? Yes. Yeah, it was great. I mean, we have visited schools all over Vermont, and I usually brag that the best meal we've ever had was in Brattleboro, but I gotta go back to Brattleboro and tell them they're number 2 now. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Correct.
Yes, he is correct.
Well, about one thing, I finally did something right.
Just wait till May.
Yes.
I had to host that one meeting.
I knew you were gonna go out,
Yes.
you.
He took
You guys
mine.
are all that purple and white.
I'm willing to, defer my newness to those who've been around a while and how this board would like to approach things. Question is, if we start ending up with some more money in our budget because we have more expertise, how much will we lose from the Agency of Education? Because clearly we get a tremendous amount.
Well,
and what kind of pressure might the agency be under to be reminded that we have some of our own expertise?
Well, I must admit, to date, since Act 98 went into effect, I mean, there have been no issues. I mean, this transition, we're still fumbling and figuring out what our role is, but there have been no huge disagreements between the agency and the board that's put staff in any conflict.
And the support level we've got from Carol and from Jill and so forth has just been excellent.
Right. And Mark?
True.
For legal counsel. So, I mean, I somehow hate to see this issue go away, because at some point I think we're going to want to be independently staffed. But there certainly isn't any immediate need right now that I can.
Would it be worthwhile for the chairman to visit with the governor and his staff before sending across a number that might have eye-popping consequences?
why don't, if you're comfortable doing that, why don't I visit? If I can't get to the governor, I'll certainly go with Jeb where the decision would be made anyway, and before the next meeting.
Is there an issue with the statute at all in terms of how it
No,
reads?
no.
Okay.
I mean,
They never
the way you
fixed it.
way you read the statute, you would think, as most people do, that, yeah, now they're an independent body. But there's nothing in there that explicitly says, and the State Board of Education shall be independently staffed. There's nothing as clear as that. At least that's my memory. But you read it and people you jump ahead and say, yeah, but.
Stephen, do other independent boards have independent staff in other agencies?
Yeah, I found
Like
one,
the
we were
labor
looking
board?
at this last time.
Who starts labor board?
I'm gonna remember it on the way home.
Okay.
But your point is valid, that there's not,
Not a lot.
most commissions or boards are staffed by the agency.
Yeah.
And just as a reminder, that what the budget guidance we were given was level funded. Not level program, but level funded, so same amount of money.
Yeah.
And whatever we want to find, any changes has to come out.
Which is a programmatic reduction.
Right.
Right.
All right, so what I hear people generally agreeing to is that we're gonna put this issue off until the November meeting. I'll follow up, see what the thinking is, and then come back to the legislative committee, and the legislative committee will be reporting back here in November.
Okay, the second part, you have something that looks like this, and this is the first thinking list of legislative priorities, which are, in putting this list together, which the committee talked about and discussed, looked at the priorities. Also, Jill Remick was very helpful in giving input. Carol was also helpful in doing that. And we do have a meeting with the legislative and gubernatorial leadership on Halloween, which will give us more information as to what we can look to see happening. And the topics that we looked at, and what I'm thinking is that we should be building a legislative priority list, which we would present to their annual meeting with the legislative committees, which will probably be in January, I would suppose. And then we would use this as the basis of developing testimony, getting people to speak to the committees, interacting as necessary. Legislative topics, money's going to be there, and if history is any lesson here, the intensity of that conversation on educational spending will be every bit as strong as it was before. And it will probably get really crazy around May. This stuff, we think this past year, things were looking pretty good, January, February, March, and then as it got toward the end of the session, it got really woolly in terms of ideas coming out of nowhere. And we'll need to be prepared for that one, but that's going to happen. Federal meltdown, we talked about that some before. The consequences, we'll just have to see.
Ally was here last month. We agreed to write a letter.
Yes.
Who wrote that letter?
My staff wrote it and I signed it. Supporting the grant?
Right.
Yes.
Oh, so
It was a very thorough, complete letter.
And Ally tells me the grant is out the door, hallelujah. It's now at over 1,000 pages or something ridiculous.
Yeah.
And she's actually received word that it's been received in a timely fashion, so.
Was anybody down there to receive it?
Yeah, there is someone, actually, there is Bill, there was a person that received it.
Left on the guards.
Yes, yes.
Table. Privatizing public schools. I believe there's a committee on this one.
Yes, we'll have a report coming out. I'll be writing.
By December 15th.
By December 15th, right. Hopefully have it out earlier, but that will be the report.
Okay, this issue is liable to come back up. For the people that are new to the board, our basic position was that we're against privatizing public schools. If you've got a public school, getting rid of the school board is not such a good idea. That's our policy position. If anybody's got different thoughts on that or would like to discuss it, maybe now would be a good time to spend a minute on it. Otherwise, we'll go with what we.
And then as a follow-up, as a however, if it's the wisdom of the legislature to allow this to continue, then we, the State Board of Education, in making that determination of whether they qualify to do that, need some new guidelines to make that judgment. Because the guidelines that are in the law and in the rules now really were set up for a private school that was incidental to a public school. Sean Marie.
So then that leads us to the discussion about looking at the rules and the rules change, which is all of the, all the timelines and whatnot. But I think if it does come up, it is something we need to take a look at our own rules, because that's what we have the authority to do.
I think either way.
But, well, I wouldn't do it now because that might encourage.
Right. No, I'm just saying that regardless of what happens after the report, you really need to look at the rules anyway, because I think that these rules were written in the last century.
We agreed that we were going to look through the rules.
Yes.
We're going to rotating looking through the rules.
Yes, that's right.
Doesn't the current statute say private school can be formed as long as it meets the state rules, state board rules, something like that?
And that's the state board rules, I think, is what we need to look at, Bill.
In any case, we're back to the rules.
Yes, we are.
Carol, at some point, we need to see, and there's no hurry.
Tomorrow would be okay.
No. January would be fine. The existing rules to form a private school. I'm sure Mark can give you the citation right off the top of his head.
Pat Palace Gray can look at the rules section.
Yeah.
Concussions, I don't see that as a state board action. It has its own life, and we can just basically sit on the sidelines and say, this is a good thing to pursue, and let the people with the medical expertise take the lead on this kind of issue.
Bill, and just so you know that we're doing our second summer study, because something was passed 2 years ago, and I think Ken could probably know better, but less than 12 months later, a new additional studies were required that basically answered the same question. So we've worked closely with the VPA and the medical community, and Jill will be reporting that out as well. So at some point, Stephen, I don't know how it works, after they've been, it can't come to you, us rather, before it goes to the legislators, but once it's been provided them with a copy, then I think it's probably not a bad idea to have Jill just go over sort of the highlights of
that would
those
be
studies.
good. I think philosophically, we're all in the same place on this issue.
Yep.
Special education SU level funding, this is, as I recall it, and again, Armando, if you have other information, this would be good. This was part of the technical corrections bill that never happened, and this was focused on special ed staff were going to the supervisory union. The question of paraprofessionals and aides was an open issue.
We have, and Varn's been leading that very cohesive group for the past 6 months.
The legislature last session accepted the special education working group's recommendation, less than unanimous, that the intent of the legislature would be better met if supervisory union boards and superintendents were allowed, as long as the method was non-arbitrary, to decide if and how many paraprofessionals they wanted to move. We've just discovered that the difference among supervisory unions and districts in the way they use paraprofessionals was so huge that in a lot of cases it seemed that moving licensed educators to the SU level, that flexibility in the hands of or the tool of the flexibility of paraprofessionals was even more important, and that we were better off letting them decide how to do it. So that is now up to them.
Okay. Basically, we don't have to take a whole lot of action on this. This will probably come out with a technical corrections bill when it's.
They passed it last time.
That's what I just need some clarification. This is part of the extension of 153, where everything was supposed to be moved to the supervisory
This is part of
union
the
level?
extension of Act 156, which is part of the extension of
Yes,
Act
but you're right,
153.
yes.
Yes, ma'am.
So are you saying that the law basically provides that you do not need to move special ed professionals into the SU?
No, I'm sorry. You need to move licensed professionals, people who are educating students with IEPs who occupy positions where the state requires a license.
Right.
They have to be moved.
Okay.
The difficulty came with paraprofessionals who frequently, sometimes on a week-to-week basis, are providing some supervision for a student with an IEP or, doing all the other things that they need to do. And
But they're only paid, they're only reimbursed for the amount of special ed services they provide, because paraprofessionals who provide special ed services get a reimbursement rate. If they're not doing special ed services, then they get audited and they have to return the money.
that will continue to be true.
Yeah, we'll continue,
But
yeah, right.
that will continue to be true whether at one end you have supervisory unions that have a special cadre of paraprofessionals who have been trained, say for example, to deal with autism. They've had special training and they want them at the SU. And then at the other end of the continuum, you'll have supervisory union boards that conclude they'd like to maximize their flexibility, and in that case will be districts. In either of those cases, the time the paraprofessional spends on special education students is eligible for reimbursement under the state formula.
What we're trying to do at this point in this conversation is identify by category the legislative issues that we want to champion during the session. Vaughn, it was a playway cutting you off saying we don't need a lot of detail at this point.
You can blame me.
There's a couple of things on the priorities that I don't know if they should be on here, but they're on our priorities, so.
Okay.
What are they?
Let me quickly go through the rest of these, and
Okay.
then let's open the floor up
Okay.
for additions.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
Full-service schools, I know of no bill that deals with that per se, but remember that's part of our priorities to push those, and I was thinking we could adopt a statement on this. Is there any activity that you're glimpsing, Armando, on full-service schools?
We have, right now.
You're working
with Doug Racine, yes.
Doug, yeah.
Yes. And looking at, we have had at least one conversation with, from Bennington, from.
Sue McGuire.
Sue McGuire, thank you. That has actually slowed down a lot, Bill, just because of his schedule, my schedule, and everything else. But that is still the goal, is to how do we come up with a model that we can present to the legislators for full-service schools, which is what you. So that's right now sitting in limbo, I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, and with the fiscal situation, who knows? But nevertheless, it's something we need to keep on the list.
But it's a way of, Bill, just in closing on that, that's a way of looking at how do we stretch more services out of AHS and education when we're working with the same population, but we all are coming in from a different angle. So fiscally, it could actually be a money saver, but ultimately better for kids.
Actually, it could.
It could.
Yeah.
That's how we see it.
Okay, so we've identified that as an issue we want to champion. Moving
Okay, broadband, Stephen's going to take care of that, so we don't have to worry about
on.
it.
Well, but keep it on the list here, just so they know it's a priority.
Okay, SPED funding, here's something that I hear is coming up, is the entire thing of the intensive reimbursement system and so forth. Is there a better way can we deal with the special education funding system that is not so laborious and tedious? I hear this is getting some attention on the scope, and I also see a lot of blank faces in the room.
Well, Bill, this came up a few years ago, and we met with this, whatever the special ed coordinators group is called, looking at getting away from a reimbursable model and looking at a block grant model. But no matter what you do, there'll always be a reimbursable part, because you know, if you have a block grant and something happens, an extraordinary expense comes in, you then have to reapply, resubmit some sort of a addendum to that. So we are looking at that, because one of the challenges right now is we're in a total reimbursement system, as you know, where there's always audit, whatever you get, there's an audit.
It's incredibly laborious.
But we have to.
Maybe
Right.
this is a legislative issue that we respond to if it takes on some life.
I would love to see it, but I wouldn't push it absent a bill.
Okay.
Spec coordinators and the
Cross it off
agency
then.
are working on something. May not be perfect, but at least it may be moving in a better direction.
Okay.
Yes, YESD, I'm talking to the people following the VSA, VSBA thing up in Stowe, and I'm told that they may have some kind of bill that they're sponsoring through their directions, content of which I don't know. We support the notion, but where does new money come
All right,
from?
let's keep it on the list until you can tell us more about it.
Yeah, I don't even know what ESD stands for, I guess.
Extended school year, extended school day.
Okay, thank you, okay, all right.
Economic Services Department.
They're- They've actually
That
came up
that says
with,
something when the secretary doesn't know.
No, I know.
I think they got expended learning is the name they're trying
Yeah,
to go towards
yeah.
or something.
All right, so now the question is, are there other issues that board members think that the legislative committee ought to be considering? Krista?
We're just changing all of Vermont education, moving towards proficiency-based. And I know Maine just passed a bill giving money to schools to help them with that transition. And if we're asking schools to make that transition, maybe we should advocate for some money or grants to help them do that. And Maine did just pass a bill this past legislative season about that. So that could be a model to look at.
Does that go along with the discussion we had this morning?
Well, no, I mean, I think it's part of our EQS. If that's going to be coming into effect and we're asking schools to change, then I think you do need some additional money. Instead of just making policy, I think we should also advocate for, if we're going to change the policy, we need to have some money to help them the schools to do that.
Well, I don't want to get into the money issue, but I think that just as an aside, we're spending so much more than we were 10 years ago with 30% fewer students. So I think there is money. The question is, how is that money allocated?
Right.
So that there are opportunities for schools to receive grants or whatever it is. Bill Talbot, you might want him at the November meeting to give you an update on where our staffing numbers were in 1997 when we had about 105,000 students, and where we are today in staffing numbers where we're at about under 80,000 students. And there's a
Are we
considerable.
under 80?
We're under 80. At public schools, it's
Okay.
about 83,000, 84 if you would take the independent schools. But I think we have 3,000 more person.
Wikipedia still
What's
says
that?
87.
3,500 more employees on schools today than we did in 1998. So it's just, from a funding perspective, I think all of these things have another layer that has to be addressed in some capacity.
As long as we're getting that data, it'd be good to get how the demographics of the students have changed over the last 10 years, too. I think that would just be an important, as we're balancing all.
Meaning the free and reduced and,
ELO,
Yep.
and, yeah, just.
So, Bill, you've got Krista's suggestion down for
I was
discussion.
just
And I'll forward you
thinking
that.
proficiency-based would also be riding on EQS to some degree.
That's what she said, yeah.
Yes.
That would be the carrier, at least in my thinking.
Okay. Any other, Margaret?
There are a couple of things on the priorities list that we had on here, and I don't know if we want to put them on there, but one is this support policy to expand free school food service. You know, we talked about the step that was made this year, and that was a positive one, and if you went the whole way, the reimbursements that would come. So that's a little tiny easy bill that might take off for somebody.
All right, that should be on that should definitely be on our list, yes.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
if, when you introduce it this year, it maybe happens.
And then we also have support policy to require school representation on all high school boards. That's
Oh, yeah,
another
yeah, yeah,
easy little thing somebody might like to do a bill
You didn't
about.
bring that up at the meeting.
He was pretty quiet.
And then the accompanying piece is student feedback mechanisms on their education. That's totally in line with pathways and multiple learning plans. So they're little policy pieces, but they fit with the direction we're moving.
Mark, did you have your hand up?
No.
All right, so we'll take this list. I'm sorry.
It's fine. I was just gonna say that my thought was that the legislative committee is also meeting.
We're meeting
today.
afterwards,
We're gonna
yes,
continue
yes.
adding
Yeah.
stuff from the priorities list, and I know, I talked with Stephen this morning about last August, my first board meeting, a group from the New England chapter of the American Heart Association, the American Cancer Society, came to the state board, and they wanted the state board to endorse a legislative proposal to make it so that schools wouldn't be liable if someone was injured after hours using like a school gym, so that therefore members of the public could use the gym, play basketball, like 8:39 if it was available, that kind of stuff. So I know at BUHS anybody can use the tennis courts, for example, as long as the
Just
teams.
because there's no way to lock them up.
Yeah, you get
I do think, though, there was a bill last session about using public schools by the public.
Yeah. So I think that might be interesting to look at, because I know they talked a lot about that. They had data about when people are able to use like recreational facilities whenever they want, obesity trends and stuff
You're up
decrease.
next.
So
Yeah, I'm correct.
Can I speak to that a little bit?
Yeah.
Because it fits with the declining enrollment and the full-service community schools. In some states, the creative use of school buildings for community services. Schools in South Dakota have little general stores in classrooms that are no longer used, public libraries, senior meals, those kinds of things. It fits with full-service community schools and keeping community schools open as community hubs. So I think there could be some policy implications for that, for use of school buildings that would be worth looking at.
Okay, so.
Mark, I would like the current legal status of school liability zone for community activities. Do you have a read on that off the top of your head?
Sure.
Really good.
I don't think the issue of legal liability for schools is specifically addressed in statute. General principles of tort liability would indicate that premises owners are responsible if people come onto their property and are injured, depending on the circumstances. There used to be a three-tiered approach. There was essentially no liability to trespassers, except not to do them harm, affirmative harm. If somebody was a so-called licensee, in other words, permitted to come on the property but not paying to do so, there was a medium level of responsibility on the part of the property owner. On the other hand, if they were a business invitee, for example, at a shopping center buying stuff, that is where the highest level of liability would attach. So that tripartite analysis is now basically a reasonable landowner responsibility. So in fact, if you allow community members to play baseball and somebody gets injured as a result of the fact that there is an open manhole cover, that could well give rise to liability. Keep in mind that all districts are required to have liability insurance under Section 1752, I think it is, of Title 16. $500,000 per individual, $2 million per occurrence. Most schools get that, I think, a majority, not all, not a high majority, but most of them get it from the Vermont School Board's Insurance Trust, VSBIT, but they're free to get it elsewhere. So I think that there is nationally a disinclination for what are called immunity statutes. So the notion of basically just giving, the schools a pass and basically say you're not going to be liable no matter what raises a lot of interesting issues, and I think that the likelihood of something like that passing, I wouldn't say is great. I know we've looked at that in the National Ski Patrol at the federal level. There's a disinclination to have liability statutes. The greater inclination from a legislative standpoint is to require insurance, which is the solution that so far exists with respect to schools. Now, keep in mind that you have to ask yourself, what's my coverage? So you should always the school district should always contact VSBIT or its insurance carrier to say, am I covered in the event that I let community members play basketball? And the answer probably would be, if it's not a school activity, the answer is no. The other solution is to require people that participate to sign waivers.
And anecdotally, that's what I understand to be the practice around the state. So that if people are going to come on the premises and play tennis at night, they do so with a signed waiver, and/or possibly insurance coverage. So that's how I would summarize the state of landowner liability, which applies to schools just like it is to anywhere else.
What's your pleasure?
Well, I'm not sure if it falls under effective
Okay.
communication if we're talking about, but it's certainly, every school
Glad
should
you
have
said
some
that, 'cause I
sort
was
of
gonna do that.
facility use policy, and that's something that the Vermont School Board Association
Yeah.
should be able to help with. So, I see that fitting underneath sort of the communication piece of our priorities. I don't see anybody here any longer with that, but, I know I've been involved, and Sean Marie probably has as well, where, you want to invite folks into your building for full-service schools or whatever, and certainly where we want to go down the road, if we want to start consolidating supervisory units and so forth, and making our schools more efficient, we want to invite more folks into our schools. And so, somewhere in there, maybe, I'm not sure if it's legislative, but certainly we need to stay focused on it so that there's model policies out there that we can get to the SUs, and then hold our administrators responsible to make sure that they're checking to make sure they have that liability.
Just 10 seconds. Big plug for the VSBA. The VSBA has a tremendous policy bank, and they divide them into mandatory policies and optional. I would think they have one.
Yeah, because they're members of the NSBA, I would assume, right?
Yes.
The VSBA has yes, so that's where that bank that Mark is talking about.
Okay, so you've given the legislative committee some good suggestions. We're going to be meeting later this afternoon, and then we'll come back to you at the November meeting with our suggested legislative priority list. Meanwhile, if you've got any thoughts, contact your able chairman, Mr. Mathis. Don't bother me, contact Bill. Yes.
I just want to comment on my think small quote that Carol put in there. And Bill asked me, anyway, the think small piece was exactly what Margaret was talking about, in terms of thinking about things this board can actually accomplish and not these big, broad things that we've been involved in, and so that we can have some accomplishments and try and all focus on some of the smaller things. Not that we shouldn't think big. But
Good point.
Okay.
Right.
That's a good point.
All right. We'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the secretary's report.
Because we're running so late behind, I see Bill, I don't have to kill any more time because Bill came back. No, because he had talked to Stephen about coming back. And I have something, because I planned around the schedule back in my office. I'll be very brief and give my time up to Vaughn. But just let you know that the transition with Rebecca's going well. Rebecca's come in once already and spent the entire day with us. Spent about 4 or 5 hours with myself, and John joined us. She went and visited with all of the agency folks at 120 and at 302. She's coming back again, I think, next week. Bill's driving down to Norwich sometime in the tomorrow morning. And we will have, he's halfway there. And she and I will have probably 3 or 4 more days, whatever, it's really around her schedule, before January 1st, and then I will be around for 2 weeks after that. The challenge that I think Rebecca has, as you all know, she's got a full-time job, she's trying to finish her doctoral dissertation, and she's got a family. So, and she's trying to learn so much.
Just a few things.
Just a few things. So we've been really protecting her. There are all kinds of organizations and folks that want to get to her email or phone number. We've been saying no. I asked Rebecca then, so-and-so wants to contact you, here's an email. If you feel comfortable calling them, that's fine, but don't feel like you have to, because she's very, and she's also sensitive to the fact that I'm still here, and then she doesn't start till January 1st. But we're really trying to protect her time so that she has a nice opportunity to transition into this job without having an onslaught of folks trying to get a piece of her, if you will. But she's met with John already. John drove down to Norwich and met with her. Bill's driving down tomorrow. She and I have regular contacts by email and by phone, but I'm also trying to be sensitive to her life as she's trying to transition out of one position into another one. So we've been having some very good conversations and have enjoyed spending time with her tremendously. So, and my number one priority right now is to make sure that she has a successful and smooth transition into this new role, and that she can hit the ground running, or at least sprinting, in January. So with that, I will finish my little report, and then we'll turn my time over to Stephen or to give to Vaughn.
Okay, but the next,
Oh, it's not Vaughn? Sorry.
I think Bill's up, although I just lost my agenda and all this.
Let's go.
Item K,
Yes,
monthly expenditure.
monthly expenditures.
It's
Mr.
good, it's
Brief-
yellow.
This is the, you should have the sheet that the accounting office prepared for you with the larger.
Do they have the same two ones that Stephen has?
No, what I did for Stephen. So anyway, you're looking at one that shows that you have a $75,845 budget. You've expended $38,770.68. You have 37 left. So a quarter of the way through the year, you're halfway through your budget, and it's alarming. However, we did compare the same year-to-date last year, and you were almost the same place. You had about $1,400 more last year at this time. It's because you have expenses that come at the front and they tail off at the end. So we will watch it for you. We'll try to keep you out of trouble, but you're not too far off from where you were last year. You have a $20,000 dues payment out of a $75,000 budget that just got paid, so that dropped you down. The June meeting doesn't get paid until July, and so that front loads your spending. So the bottom line is, it's close, but it's not much closer than it's ever been. I think you'll be okay. We'll just watch it for you.
This is a very small issue in the scheme of things, but this board, obviously, in this transition, is going to want to get out more often and participate with different educational partners. So I would ask you, when you're looking at the FY15 budget, that you might consider requesting an increase in the per diems for board members.
The number of per diems.
Number of per diems.
The $50 per diem has been around since before I came here. I remember when you were back there.
I'm personally going to take that on this winter.
Oh, you are?
For all
Yeah.
commissioners, I
Remember,
think.
Martha O'Connor did once when she was here, yeah.
And I expect to have the same success that Martha did.
Either way too much then, when they started it, or not nearly enough today. I don't know what you.
There are two boards that are paid $100, the Liquor Control Board and the Parole Board.
That's because those are dangerous jobs.
So,
This has that potential.
No, I mean, I come at it from a public participation, you know, that, you know, if the public are going to participate, you can't pay them the same rate that you're paying in the 1950s. But I'm not making that request of you, but I do think.
I understand.
And that's going to make Carol's job easier, because she tries to keep that line item right in line. And she's going to have a hard time this year.
And our general budget instructions for our preliminary budget work for all state government, the memo that came out from Jeb Spalding was, go crazy, just keep it at where it was last year.
Well,
yes, level funded.
And we
level
still
funded.
build, but we still just, I mean, we kid, but we still don't know where the salary adjustment.
So we don't budget the increases due to the collective bargaining agreement. They aren't part of our budget. There's a separate bill that's called the Pay Act that's adopted for that, and we don't know, I mean, everybody got their raises, little tiny ones.
People got
but they
raises?
Got them. Some did, yeah. But we haven't been given the money to pay them yet, so we will at some point. We don't know. They never give us the full amount. They always tell us to go find it, but.
And Bill, just for a brief, like for 30 seconds, if you could just tell how much more the new facility is going to cost us in the current?
I don't know more.
But it was like somewhere in the couple $100,000.
Yes, it is a couple $100,000 more. We are meeting.
Operate?
Pardon me?
To operate?
Excuse the interruption. I want to wish the girls soccer team luck today for the last home game. It is senior day, so teachers, if you can get to the game, it'd be great. Thank you.
I mean, heat in those.
Yeah, the rent will go up in the new building. We are meeting with the administration tomorrow afternoon, and we will also raise that issue again to make sure we understand where that's coming from.
Because our concern is that if it is our base, if this then becomes part of our base amount, then we've absorbed the base amount that may be without increasing the base by that same amount.
I'm sorry to cut this conversation
Yeah, but
off, but we don't run the agency
You don't care.
anymore.
That's
You don't
right,
care
that's
about
right,
the
that's
agency.
right.
I understand that
That's
too.
true, that's
Yes.
true. Poor Rebecca, she's gonna have a heck of a,
Okay, thank you, Bill, for coming back early to
Well, is your budget committee's gonna meet after?
the legislative committee.
Yeah,
Yes.
so
Okay, Vaughn, item L.
I'll do my best to get you as close to back on schedule, since you should have adjourned, as I can, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, we got the wrong person then.
I'm basically going to give you an update on the status of the SU boundary studies that the board requested, and then actually just talk to you more in general about Act 156 grants as a subject. Going down the list, Essex Caledonia SU, I attempted on Friday to reach the superintendent, who was out, and yesterday was a holiday for everybody but state workers.
And me.
Did you get a
Chittenden County Schools had school.
I know, but they didn't.
You did?
Orange East.
Let's not cut into Vaughn's time.
Orange East, when they realized they were going to be hiring a new superintendent, petitioned the board to let the superintendent become somewhat familiar before they began their study. So that study does not begin until January 2014. Washington South completed a study. They are basically in limbo because all of their potential partners are also potential partners for Windsor Northwest, which is itself in the midst of a study. But since there's a report on the shelf that could be acted upon as the Windsor Northwest study is completed. Wyndham Southwest, I did not check on because they have a new superintendent and a very new business manager, and their financials are not in, and it seemed that it was better to leave them in peace. I will call them in some weeks. Windsor Northwest is an agency study. It is on track. We will provide financial results primarily and let you hear from the potential people in the various supervisory unions involved at the November meeting as directed. We have solid figures on savings, and they're quite substantial. I do remind you again that savings in the abstract do not go dollar for dollar into lower tax rates. When supervisory unions achieve savings, they may lower assessments. They may use the money for additional education services, and typically there are some transition costs. When we give the presentation in November, we'll argue that we've actually incorporated significant additional monies for transition costs in the proposal. Winooski is in the midst of an Act 156 grant. They've been directed to study boundary changes. Thus far, the initial study is working with Burlington primarily on things that could be achieved more immediately. I think there was
Food service was one that they could have acted on immediately.
There was a slight intentional or unintentional miscommunication. The secretary and I were there, and the secretary suggested that they could make some of these changes with a phone call, and it turns out that the first 6 months of their study is going to be looking at those changes, and then they're going to look at the potential for boundary changes, but we are tracking them. We've listed all of the approved Act 156 studies. I don't think we need to go through them one by one. Most of them are $5,000 studies, and the important thing to remember is they don't report to us. They do an application, they say they want to do something that involves 2 districts, at least, or 2 SUs, and the money is going to be used for consulting and legal expenses,
and they are the ones who determine when the consultants and attorneys, if they hire them, have met the requirements, and then they submit the invoices. So in many cases, we don't expect to hear anything until they've finished. There are cases where what they're doing involves the board. For example, if you look at Rutland Southwest, there's a proposed boundary change with Tinmouth, and there I talk with them regularly. At the moment, they're trying to decide whether to use a fairly complex form to make a report to the board or an expedited form that the board approved last year. And I explained that the difference is if everybody agrees, that is to say, superintendents, 2 SU boards, and obviously the community, then you use the expedited board form. If anybody disagrees, then the board has to evaluate the arguments, and you need to present the board with additional information. So I gather they're going to have a rather large meeting and decide whether or not there's sufficient agreement, and that's clearly the next thing they need to do to move forward. But the bulk of them, we simply know that they're doing some fairly, at least to us, abstract things that have the potential to allow districts to work together. For the record, this is not an initiative of the agency, and it's somewhat problematic to control it. We can certainly control the invoices and the applications, but we don't have a very good sense of what's happening in most cases. We'll certainly ask afterwards, what did you learn, what do you come up with? Mr. Secretary?
And I just want to add that one of the, and maybe it's not necessarily a board legislative issue, but one of the issues that we're discussing is, right now, the agency barely has does not have the capability to do the studies. We have done a couple, and we found money within our own agency to pay for Norm Andrews, who you've met before. I have less confidence when we allow districts to do their own studies. Not that they're not doing, that they're not conscientious, but they may not always be looking at the same things that we're looking at. Even the same questions sometimes can be answered differently. So one of the things that we would like to ask the legislators is if there could be some money from the Ed Fund that could be used by the agency when there are studies to be done, so they could be done consistently with our supervision, of course, with their input and their involvement, but managed by us as opposed to managed by the districts. As you saw, the bat and kill report was not done by us. I think our report would have been a different report, quite honestly. And you'll see the report that Norm Andrews is going to bring next month, which you'll probably act on in December, because you always wait a month to act on reports. The savings and the areas that we may have investigated.
It's substantial.
It's substantial. So that's just, it's an aside that we need some help in doing these studies.
Well, I would encourage the agency with your, maybe some of your report, but certainly this issue that Armando's talking about, to also work with our Supervisory Union Study Committee, which Steve Dale is chairing, and there's other board members, and they're meeting this afternoon. But I would encourage you to stay in touch with them.
And not against, I love Steve Dale, but remember that the VSBA has a position. And I think that position, obviously, I have a position, you can tell what my position is. We all.
No. Really?
Well, you'll have the option. I mean, I think the first place you ought to work with is the Supervisory Union Study Committee. If that doesn't work out, come back to the Legislative Committee.
I will be happy, this afternoon, I'm afraid.
I'm not suggesting that, yeah.
But clearly, the Secretary's point that studies that the agency has initiated have been able to find substantially more savings is unarguable. I also suspect that if you were to do just a simple just a simple matrix, you'd find out that there's a correlation between people wanting to do a study and people wanting the study to come out, that there's no need for a merger. And it was a board decision which the Secretary either didn't oppose or may have recommended to give them the authority. They asked for the choice. And with the benefit of hindsight, we see some problems on the way. But I will definitely work more closely with the Supervisory Union Committee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks for your report. All right, moving on to the consent agenda.
So moved.
Motion has been made. Is there a second to approve it? Bonnie seconds it. Any discussion? Not hearing any. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. Not hearing any noes. The consent agenda is approved unanimously. Let's move to adjourn and then look at the calendars, and I've got one other thing to talk about just momentarily. So the chair would entertain a motion
So
to
moved.
adjourn. Moved by Lachlan, seconded by Bonnie. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no, and the ayes have it. Carol will go over this.